It's Tuesday, October 19th, and you're listening to the Beer Temple podcast.
Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard, seen from again. Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard, seen from again.
Guaranteed, some people already know that Surge is back, based just on that magical fade in.
Correctly timed fade is that
versus how I would do it.
You did a really good job on the beginning parts.
Yes.
You forgot to play the outro music.
Both times. Caught it just in time the second time.
Yeah.
Yes.
But, if anyone's listening by then, they're already, they're going to be cool with you,
Yes.
the bumps in the road of
Yes.
producer Chris.
Yes. But thanks, guys, for tuning in or downloading or however you guys are listening to it these days. And, we're back at full strength. So I'm Chris. Mike's also here.
Yep.
And we've got producer Serge on the ones and twos, so to speak.
There's a noticeably chiller vibe with Surge back on the ones and twos.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah. Yes, it's true.
A lot of confidence coming from Surge. He's
If anyone
glowing.
did notice the fade in, you owe it to yourself and to us to send a letter of some kind.
Yeah, if you're a Surge nerd, send us a letter.
Yeah, a Surge head.
Yeah, if you can tell when
you're a
Surge
big
is
Surge
fading,
head.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right.
A Fade Master fan.
Fade, exactly. So welcome back to Surge back from sunny Hawaii. Was supposed to be there for a third week, but just couldn't stay away. The rumor. That's the rumor.
Told
anyway.
his new wife, I got to
Sorry.
get back and record these guys talking about
I got a fever.
beer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the only prescription.
Is more fading.
More Beer Temple podcast.
Exactly.
It's hear us talk about brown ale more.
Yes, exactly. So we have a special show.
Yeah.
I'm excited about it.
Me too.
Yeah. But first, let me just get some of the whatever. Just the
housekeeping.
The housekeeping. That's the word I was looking for. Out of the way. So thanks for listening to the Beer Temple podcast. Thanks for Lumpen Radio for having us on. Thanks to the fearless leaders over there. We are not coming from Studio BT today because it's being used to pack up boxes of beer. So we're now in the Fox Room is kind of what we call it. We used to call it the Buffalo Room.
Yeah, but
the
he doesn't
Buffalo
live here anymore.
He was moved. So
The
now
Fox Den.
The Fox Den. So we're in Studio F.
Where the darts are.
Yeah, I'm looking at the dartboards directly behind you.
Studio
They probably
D-
have good
Studio
acoustic quality,
DB.
though. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so we're coming here, and it's going to be, I think, the first time we've just had a single guest with both of us since we brought the show back, right?
We did Alexi.
That's right. We did
That
do
was a
one
fun
with
one.
Alexi, too.
Yeah, that was a
Okay.
good one.
So we don't do many of these. So this was a little bit of a spur of the moment. I'll just get to it and introduce our guest. We have Mike Siegel of Goose Island Brewing Company back for the second time? Or is this how many times you been? Third time?
We were talking about that before you walked in. Yes, I was on officially the Beer Temple podcast at Lumpen. I want to say February 2020, something like that.
All right.
Before all the shit hit the fan.
In which you
Yeah.
sprung the pandemic on everyone on that episode.
Pulled it out of my pocket.
Remember, you were like, hey, guys,
check
just
this
back
out.
from Wuhan.
Yeah.
Great place. Anyway.
Mic drop.
Goose Island, Wuhan.
Exactly.
But what was we did that one with Kaiser,
No. Oh, that was long
like
ago.
2016.
That was before.
It wasn't really Beer Temple. It was some other.
That wasn't even mine. That was
You were
his.
there.
Yeah, and he invited me on
Different times.
to do a streaming. It was like you, me, was it John Barley or someone? I forget who else it was. And Edmar was there. That's when I was really introduced to Edmar.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
he was like, "Hey, you did great. If you want to come on and do this again," and he was doing like one time. Just he was trying to fill slots one like special at a time, and I was like, "I'll come on every week,
every Thursday."
And he was
for
like, "Yeah,
2
sure,
hours.
sure." And I don't think he believed me, which his fault.
I don't even know if it got to that point. He was like, "Yeah, this crazy guy shows up for 2 hours every Thursday to talk about beer with 4 other people.
Right.
He can do it. He can have as much time
Right.
as he wants."
And then I
Then
did
the
that for
Boogie
years.
Monsters will kick him out.
Yeah, exactly. So that's right.
So yeah, unofficially, that was
Yeah.
when you and I first did a show together.
True.
And then one other time, I
before.
think.
Yeah.
I've got an almost 3-year-old and an almost 5-year-old. So I was telling Mike, I don't think Mike and I had met before
think so.
until just a few minutes ago. But I said I've been out of it. I've been way off the radar for the last 5 years. So it's good to be out. Thank you so much for having me. This is
Yeah, man.
It's exclusive, guys. You hear it here
This is
first. He's back, baby.
I'm back.
I'm back.
Yeah.
Got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, so it's gonna be fun, and you and I don't know, we just tend to chat randomly a couple times a year. It seems like, and have been. Jesus Christ,
There's a specter in the room.
Max was behind.
Max is wearing all black, standing next to a black wall with a black mask on, and just kind of creeping on Chris.
My lizard brain is what I was like. Is the only thing that detected it. I'm like a T-Rex. It was just in the very peripheral. I saw something move. I saw something moving and like some sort of a stabbing motion coming at me.
This is when he finally kills.
Jesus.
He finally gets you.
Okay.
Live on air.
Wow. All right. Anyway, we would talk every so often, and I think we have at least one beer passion that is not exclusive to us, but isn't necessarily the most popular thing in beer, which is kind of historic styles and the history of beer and stuff like that. So it's always fun to kind of geek out.
Yeah,
on
you can
that
say
sort of
that
thing.
again. There's about 5 or 6 of us that really, if you have the pleasure of hearing Ron Pattinson talk at any point, you know what we're maybe going to talk a little bit about
Yeah.
tonight. And
I totally forgot about it. We also did that show, which
you
became a
hosted-
podcast, right?
yeah, you hosted the Obadiah Poundage release party at Goose. It was we share some.
and
very
upstairs
esoteric
at Owen and Engine. Didn't we do a thing with Ron Pattinson?
We might,
then?
yeah.
I think we've done several.
No,
things.
you
Anyway.
you did a video podcast
Yes,
of us.
yes.
Do you still do those?
Very rarely because they suck to edit.
That's
Very-
why, right? Not just you don't want to be in front of the camera.
So yeah,
Yeah.
we've done a few official
Yeah,
things, but we see each other
true.
every now and again. And like I said, I'm back, baby. So you'll see more
Yeah.
of me.
Cool.
I've moved to the burbs where it's amazing how you go from a city like Chicago with great beer everywhere, and then you get to the burbs and you're like, what the fuck happened?
Right.
So
They're doing all right. They got some gold fingers now. They got some stuff happening. They got
Mm-hmm.
art history out in the West Burbs. They got some interesting
oh yeah,
stuff
there's
going
there's
on.
definitely promise, but
But it
coming
is-
from Chicago,
yeah,
where
it
you
is
just
a-
fall in any direction, and there's fabulous beer,
Right.
breweries, beer bars.
And even the beer culture out there is a little different. Even so, the breweries that is supplying that culture, so to speak, are just going to be different because they're supplying a different, slightly different beer culture. Now there are
Sure.
going to be art history and
Roaring
Goldfingers
Table
and
and Goldfinger. And,
and Afterthought and those
Oh, yeah.
guys. But you know what I mean.
Right,
So
right.
I'm still getting up to speed on breweries that have opened in the last 5 years. To be honest with you,
Good luck.
It's only a handful.
When you get up to speed, let me know. Give me a cheat sheet so I can also get up to speed.
that's why I still come here regularly. It's the only place I come regularly to buy beer, and I'm like, it's always education. So
Appreciate it. Well, thanks for that. And the reason we're having you on is to, just talk about things that I think you are pretty uniquely specialized and able to talk about. So we're going to talk about, I'm guessing you guys know where this is coming. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit as far as what you do at Goose and then we'll take it from there. We should also probably talk about beers we've had lately that we're excited about. I always like hearing what people are drinking.
if I didn't say it earlier, thanks for having me, both of you.
Of course.
It is a pleasure. I listen to the podcast. I really enjoy this place. So Thanks for having me. My name's Mike. I work at Goose Island, actually coming up on my 10th anniversary.
Wow.
In about another month and some change. So I started as a brewer there, shift brewer, and for the last 8 years I've been innovation manager, and innovation being the kind of, at least part of the industry uses that term to be new beer development. I've never really cared for the word.
Pee-wee's Playhouse word of the podcast.
It's
We had a whole show talking about that word.
So I've kind of rebranded myself R&D manager for a while, and but it's still officially innovation manager. But basically, new beer development. I've done pretty much everything with that at the brewery. Right now, my focus is more on the barrel side of things. I work a lot with Bourbon County Stout, and I brought some other barrel-aged projects that I've worked on over the years and that I'm proud of. So if maybe we'll crack open a couple.
Sweet.
And some of them are big beers, but I think you guys are no strangers to such.
Yeah.
So
Well, I see.
Save those for the hotter takes.
yeah.
Max is just waiting in the shadows, so there must be something that he's interested to try. So, no. And if you do want to chill anything down, you go ahead, Max, and you can drop. I mean, I think Max has carte blanche to open whatever he wants. So let's before we dive into it, has anybody had any beers lately that they really liked, or is there any beers that people are excited to have in the near future? I've had one, so I can go. Well, we have I think it's like once a year that we get the Beechwood stuff in, Max. Is that about right? Yeah, so we got the Amalgamator from Beechwood, 2 weeks old.
Gross.
It's so gross. It's so gross. And we did a big like blind tasting with 5 other West Coast IPAs, some local, some from the actual West Coast. And I mean, it's not fair to, well, I'm not dissing any of the other ones that were on there.
Sure.
But it was definitely, to me, head and shoulders above everything else. It was just...
Was Headhunter on there?
Headhunter was not on there.
We gotta do a
Head-to-head.
shootout of Chris's favorite West Coast IPAs. Got that Headhunter, Amalgamator. What else is in there?
That's probably the top
just 4
I mean,
cans of those two different beers.
There are others,
What
but
about
those are
what
the
for like
two
a main lunch?
that would be a
Or
great
dinner?
one.
Do you like dinner better? Or you're a lunch man.
I like lunch. I like another one, too. Another one is a really good one.
That is the name of the beer.
Yes, another one.
Let's line them up, see what you actually like the best, and then we'll throw.
And I think
Pizza
Pizza Port makes some really amazing West Coast IPAs, too.
Then
So just
King
like-
Julius,
And then
just
King Julius as well.
Your favorite beer.
My favorite beer of all time,
Yeah.
as we all know.
Pizza Port, I got a great story really quick.
Yeah,
My
go
wife
for
and
it.
I went there years ago, the one in San Clemente.
Okay.
And she went to go get ice cream, and I'm going to grab a couple beers here. I've never been to a Pizza Port, and I really enjoyed myself. And she came back from the ice cream shop. She goes, I just got drive-by water ballooned. What does that even mean? Like this beautiful town of San Clemente with this beautiful brewery, and literally just a bunch of kids. I mean, this is such a random story.
Yeah.
But, just a bunch
Vector-
of kids in the middle of the
some
afternoon just started
bunch
throwing
of
water.
rascals.
Yeah. I said, well,
I mean,
for some reason I remember
that's-
that as well as much as the beers. But yeah, Pizza Port, great stuff.
This
Great
seems
beers.
very like Southern California vibe to me. Like I don't feel like that happens in Chicago.
Yeah.
You
lady. except it being a woman, it seems like pretty, I don't know, wholesome. It should have been a guy, and
they
then he
drove
yells,
off in
and you
their
go
Ford
drive
Fit,
off.
like
She was eating her ice
truck
cream
and
cone.
crashed
right,
into the
a
manure.
lady eating an ice cream cone.
Yeah,
What's
like,
water
it's like
balloon?
a Norman Rockwell painting of,
Yeah,
of a story.
exactly. Yeah, nowadays that one, it's like jerk off kids
Yeah,
terrorizing people.
throwing Tide Pods at you or whatever the kids are doing now.
Yeah, so that's mine.
that
That's
was a long time ago.
Amalgamator is the one that I've been looking forward to and enjoying quite a bit lately.
Nice.
So I'm happy that we've got plenty of it. So anything for you, Mike?
Yeah, this weekend I went to my landlord's anniversary Oktoberfest party. Beguile had a
I was like, it took me a while.
yeah, we joke. I mean, I guess it kind of is my landlord.
Octoberversary.
Yeah, so them and Dovetail, they're like a block away from each other, and they team up on Oktoberfestiversary, where I
Rolls
don't know
off
whose
the tongue.
anniversary it is or what's
rolls
going
right
on. It's
off there.
October, kind of Oktoberfest. But I drank a bunch of flannel pajamas, which is their kind of just straightforward
Yeah.
stout, oatmeal stout, and it was great. Stouts have become such a monster these days. I kind of blame you, Mike. Goose Island. But having a nice little 5-6%. It's maybe 6%.
Oh, was it?
Maybe
it wasn't like the
it wasn't
Imperial.
pajama. No, just regular flannel pajamas. 6-ish, 7-ish maybe percent. Just a roasty stout when it was 55 degrees out. It was killing it. It was great. I had 5.
I went there as well.
Perfect.
They had so many different types of beer there. There was a couple other groups. My kids were there, and a couple other neighborhood parents were there. I mean, I'm how I'm a block away from there.
Yeah.
So a bunch of us just kind of converged, and I just realized how differently I drink from most people, because some people were going and getting the Imperial pajamas, IPAs. A bunch of people were getting Oktoberfest. I had 3 beers there. I had the Alt first, then the Hefeweizen, then I went over to Beguile. I was like, well, I should get something from Beguile. Saw that they had an ESB. I was like, well, I guess that takes care of that. I have to try it at least. And people were like, what are you doing? Why are you drinking the Alt and then the bitter and then
I got a specific color palette I'm working on. It's like an earth tones Kanye thing.
Exactly.
Only this specific shade of brown.
Right.
I think Beguile gets lost in the shuffle a
ridiculous.
lot when people talk about breweries that make great versions of kind of simple classic things where they make a good ESB, they make a really good regular oatmeal stout, they make a great blonde ale. Might not be as sexy as some, but everything I have from them is solid, and I have a lot of their beers because they're my landlord. So
Yeah, right.
yeah.
How about you, Mike? Have you had anything lately?
Well, you and I were up at Half Acre last week. Lagertown's great. Oktoberfest. I mean, it's great to have a malty seasonal that pretty much every brewery makes an Oktoberfest, right? You can more or less count on it. And me, I love it all, but just a good Oktoberfest, a good malt forward beer. Some are a little bit. I mean, I think that one's 6%, maybe something like
it's a little
that.
stronger,
A little hoppy for the style, but just it goes down really easy. I saw that they had Original Reaper. I didn't have one, but I love that beer too. Talk
great
about
beer.
stout, American stout. Just there's just not. You mentioned ESBs. Just there's not enough of them.
I'm on a mini. Well, it's formulating. It's still it's a nascent idea in my mind that I think there should be more. There's an opportunity for more nitro beers, because I had Reaper on nitro years ago. Again, I think it was right before COVID, and it was amazing. One of the few times I actually went back, it was at the Green Lady, and I specifically went back to have it again on nitro, because I was like, well, it's not going to be anywhere else that I know, and it'll probably never be around again, and I was right. And then when I was at Scotland, I noticed that had become a thing since I was last in the UK, was a lot of places having nitro towers, draft towers, and then maybe a hand pull or two. And the nitro towers were always what we would consider to be cask-worthy styles. So they were lighter, maltier, and I would say a pale ale is still a malty.
An English pale ale.
Yeah, an English pale ale is still a malt-driven beer.
Sure.
But they would have them on nitro, and they were a really nice approximation of cask. You drink them so easily, and it was a great experience that you just don't have here. You have Guinness, which is a great, very drinkable beer, but that's really it. You might get Left Hand Milk Stout on nitro.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense that they would be moving a lot of stuff that traditionally would have been on cask to nitro to some better.
Well, that's why nitro
package too,
exists. That's
right?
why Guinness invented nitro, was to approximate cask ale.
We have a lot of romanticism around cask, but if you're an actual publican and you're going to lose money if that cask oxidizes and you don't sell all of it, it makes a lot of sense to convert a lot of that.
And we
to
were at small
nitrogen.
towns. We were in a lot of small towns, and I'm sure that, if they had their casks run, sometimes they did, and I think they all used breathers because the casks were actually drinking pretty well. But they couldn't have had 4 casks at these little places. But they can have 4. They can have 1 cask and 3 nitro or 4 nitro, and it was cool. And it's keeping those styles around because they just drink better on nitro. So
100%. Yeah, we used to have way back before my time. I think back in Brendelson's time, we had a couple of small tanks rated for for nitro, 35 psi, but none of ours are these days. We've done the occasional keg,
Yeah.
of nitro, but we just don't have the vessels to do that are pressure rated for nitro.
Yeah.
They used to do Goose IPA nitro.
Yeah,
Way back in the day.
It used
Sounds
to be a
great.
thing. They used to have, casks would come out every once in a while from breweries, and you'd have nitro versions of stuff coming out every once in a while. But I think that's just, I don't think it's necessarily dying out forever. I mean, maybe it is. I don't know. But it's definitely in a lull right now, that kind of stuff. So it was nice to go somewhere else and see it and be reminded of, or just being shown an interesting way that I hadn't thought of serving different styles of beer. Because we have a couple draft nitro lines, and I think we can quick convert two more.
The flux capacitor.
Yeah. Well, we don't, but we have these little all we have to do is flip a switch, and it becomes essentially a nitro line. We'd have to put on a nitro faucet as well, but we could do it, and we don't think to ask. Because
Well, I mean, it's a weird time, right? You haven't been in that mode for at least 2 years.
Yeah,
so,
right.
But I was just having a conversation with my friend Gabe about how we missed nitro beers, and how I hadn't had a nitro beer in at least a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And then I came here last week and I had a couple belly ups. Actually, I had 2 or 3 belly
cask
ups.
beer, you mean?
Cask
Yeah.
belly up from Hopewell, and it was tasting amazing.
yeah, really good.
And it just I hardly ever get things twice in a row here unless it's like Pivo or something like that. But I got 2 of those back to back.
We're going to have the mild on soon, too, from Rev. Coming on.
All right.
Oh, nice.
Baby.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
We're making a couple casts this week for the first time in a long time.
Cool. How they go.
So we'll see. We're going to do a honkers and
Good luck.
something else.
Nice.
Very cool.
So let's get into it. I was mentioning before that you are, I think, uniquely situated in the world of beer to talk about, a few different things with expertise. One of them being just working in a barrel program. I think you were saying something like you've probably touched more barrels or something than probably pretty much anybody at this point.
Well, I don't know about that, but as much as just, we're doing so I've been Goose for 10 years. My entire 10 years have been more or less some capacity with barrels. I started in the brew house and cellar and whatnot, but certainly the last 8 have been a lot of barrel work, and of course most of that's bourbon. I was looking at our numbers. We just had a buddy of mine just left for another job on the East Coast, and I was looking up pictures of him and I over the years, and I found a snapshot of the size of our barrel program and just a number in 2014, and it was 3,900 bourbon barrels and 2,600 wine barrels.
Which is huge.
It's massive. Yeah.
Huge.
And that was 7 years ago. And what's funny is the bourbon side has grown dramatically, and the oak age sour has
Basically disappeared.
unfortunately.
Gone away, yeah.
Unfortunately, and you guys, I don't have to tell you guys the market dynamics that have been at play. We were in 750s. We were, premium price. We were using a lot of fruit from Michigan, which drove up the price. And they were beautiful beers when they were right, but I think the advent of kettle sours and a cheaper way to sour and maybe a consumer palate that wasn't as interested in a 18-month aged beer. Obviously, those drinkers still exist, but
Not at the scale that
yeah,
Goose Island.
I think we were projecting, based on those numbers, 3,900 bourbon and 2,600 X wine for sour. You could see it was 2/3 of the bourbon program. We were really banking big on oak age sours, Halia, Lolita, Juliet, Madame Rose, etc. And we were doing 700 barrels a year for 5 brands for 5-6 years.
Wow.
We were just a machine. And I mean that in a good way, just like a production of fruit in the barrel, Brettanomyces, bacteria, the whole bit. And it all kind of, I wouldn't say it came crashing down, but it kind of faded out. And It's tough to fade out a barrel program like that
It's
as well.
2,400 barrels. There.
And it was, so I think we're still feeling a little bit of the hangover of that. And, for everything that's been positive on the Bourbon County and bourbon front, I think I still think about that side of the program. And I think one of my tasks now is to just reimagine that side of things. Sure.
Right.
I mean, we're drinking a little bit of Obadiah Poundage here, which was Fooder, aka fat aged, for a year and then blended with fresh beer. So a different take on that. But anyway, bourbon is its own story. So I don't know where you want to go, if you want to go down that path. But
yeah, so let's talk about Bourbon County specifically. I'd be very interested to start talking about just some of the I should also mention that Mike is in a pretty cool situation because you ran the barrel program from its inception at Pipeworks.
Yeah.
About the same size, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Started with 4 barrels.
Yeah, take away a 0.
When I left, I think there were like 450 or something, so it was pretty significant. But for the scale of what they were doing, but nothing like. I mean, you were talking about 7 years ago too. How many barrels do you have now in the bourbon program?
Keep in mind we've got a number of vintages at play at any given time. We've got 6-month stock, 12-month stock, sometimes 2-year stock, but we're loosely at the peak. We're probably 10,000 barrels or so, 10,000 casks. Most of that's bourbon, but there's mixed stuff. I brought some rum. I didn't bring tequila, but we do tequila. I mean, bourbon makes up probably 90 to 95% of the barrels that we're filling and emptying these days. But we like to sprinkle in Scotch occasionally, rum, tequila. I don't think our barrel program is the biggest. I think Founders might be.
Really?
At least that's what I'd heard. I haven't been there in a while, but it's a significant program, and bourbon, bourbon's fun. So you and I last week were talking about, and I don't know how deep you want to go into this, but like specifications for barrels and like thinking about a bourbon barrel as you would hops,
right,
and malt, right? Like you, as brewers, were really interested in where our ingredients come from, but when I talk to a lot of brewers, it's just they're just getting whatever barrels happen to be flowing through their broker, and I challenge them to think a little bit more about that. We obviously have our well documented issues of 2015 BCS, and part of that was just trying to correct any upstream issues that we felt that we were having. And the first thing I did was go down to Kentucky and go to our broker or the cooperage, and realize that I knew, but I didn't quite realize what they were doing to the barrels. They were taking some barrels apart. They were sitting around. We were at the time specifying 8+-year-old spirit barrels, so whiskey that was 8 years. And that meant the barrels would sit in the facility sometimes for a couple weeks waiting to fill up a truck. So the things that we did after 2015 was to specify 4+-year-old bourbon barrels, so which is the vast majority of barrels that were dumped.
So you can get, and what's the reason for that? Why did you go from 8 to 4? Just because there's a higher, you're not going to be waiting. They're going to be there.
Correct. We don't want the barrels to sit in the cooperage for very long.
Right.
So they literally, and I'm sure you guys have, if you've been following what's happening down in Kentucky, Heaven Hill's been on strike for 5 weeks, which Heaven Hill's made up 40+% of Bourbon County barrels for many years, and we're not quite feeling it yet. But I guarantee you, it's on us. Nobody's gonna be like, why didn't you make Bourbon County? Like our job is to make Bourbon County stout, but we can't just open up any old barrels to making it. So,
which is kind of what you're getting into.
So treating bourbon barrels like you would anything that you're going to put in your beer, and getting to know the producers. So we go down to the distilleries, talk to the master distillers, talk to the master blenders, talk to the dump line manager. The most important guy is the dump line manager.
And what's the dump line manager?
Somebody who's overseeing, dumping is the term for your audience if they're not aware. In beer, it's usually a bad thing when we talk about dumping. In bourbon, it's emptying a vessel of bourbon to bottle it.
So the guy on the production line
the
who's emptying this barrel that's been sitting for 4 or 5 or whatever years, it gets pulled out, and the one who's taken the spirit out of that barrel is on the dump line.
Supervising it.
Supervising
and so the specifications were 4+ year old barrel because those are always dumping, thousands a week throughout Kentucky. No recoupering. If the barrel doesn't look good, they'll do a surface check. They'll grade it into A, B, and C grades. If it doesn't look to them, if it doesn't pass a visual inspection, it's denied. If it passes, it literally goes off of one truck and goes on a truck for us. Okay. So it doesn't sit around the cooperage, doesn't collect dust or anything else. And probably most importantly, they don't open up the barrel. Yeah. So for most barrels, and my numbers are a few years dated, but the bourbon barrel aftermarket is mostly suiting spirits and mostly Scotch at that. Like 90+% of the barrel aftermarket is going to Scotland. I mean, Scotland's huge just there. Scotland is huge for second use bourbon. And so beer, even a brewery of our size, using as many as we do, is still just a fraction of the barrel market. So what they were doing, because they would oftentimes flat pack them, whatnot, they'd take apart barrels. So, or just sometimes if they were going to ship them whole, they'd take a head off that looked a little wonky. They put a new head on. Well, of course, you're opening up the barrel to further contamination. So we want and one of the most other important things is very limited rinse on the barrels. So most Buffalo Trace, Heaven Hill, Wild Turkey, most of the ones we're using will do a 1 to 2 gallon rinse after they dump. So
explain what that means again, a rinse, because I didn't know what the technical term and the technical specifications for a rinse is when you're emptying a barrel. Could you just talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah. So when you're emptying a barrel, and again, not my words, I'm just conveying what's been told to me down in Kentucky. Porous wood, obviously, 2 to 5 gallons of whiskey can exist in the pores of the wood, in the wood itself, 2 to 5 gallons.
That's a lot.
And so as soon as you dump it, they'll do a quick little rinse, like a little mini spray ball I'm envisioning that's just in line with the pump, the vacuum tube, or however they're doing it. They're pumping it out, and from there it's 1 to 2 gallons, and then it's done. Then they put a wood bung in, they roll it out, and it's gone.
And they rinse that water out. The water leaves, and then they plug it up, or they keep the water in there?
That I don't know. I've been told things like they will separate the streams, and then they'll use that water to cut the spirit down to bottling proof. I don't know exactly what happens there, but critically, I don't want them to continue to rinse that barrel for 5 minutes and get all that distillate out, because that's a preservative. Ethanol is not only flavor, and it helps create beers like Bourbon County Stout, but it's a preservative. It's an antimicrobial, right? So we don't want them to open the barrel. We want to preserve what's in, and then we need to get that barrel to Chicago as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally from when I was doing it, and I handled pretty much every single barrel that came in. And when we started I started doing it in 2012, you could get pints of undiluted, unproved down. We called it char juice because it was just black, and I thought it was horrendous. But we drank it because it was ethanol in it, like you said. But by the end of when I was doing it, which was probably 2 years ago, was probably the last time I received a shipment of spirit barrels, there's much less in them. It might just be anecdotal, but I think they got wise to
Well, listen to tell them what you were saying about. I'm sorry, go on.
But they're things like the Devil's Cut and like bourbon exploding over the last 7-8 years. Yeah. They're trying to find a lot more ways for them to keep the bourbon, I would imagine.
Certain distilleries, and it behooves anybody using bourbon barrels to find out which, will add water back to the barrels and then do an extended aging, maybe for a week, maybe for 2 weeks. Some use more sophisticated technology to kind of, what was described to me almost looked like a gigantic kind of paint can shaker, using agitation in water, because you're essentially trying to harvest more distillate out of the inside of the barrel. And it makes sense from their point of view. Totally. It makes sense. This is something that they worked 4+ years on, right?
And they don't have to worry about the microbial soundness of.
and some distilleries are concerned more about the aftermarket than others. Heaven Hill seemed really concerned about making sure their barrels retain their quality as they shipped over to Scotland. But others just want to get that distillate out. So going back to what I was saying, 4+ year old barrels, because that's the most common age of barrels that are dumping. So just, you're not waiting for barrels, you're getting barrels in. No recuperage. 1 to 2 gallon rinse, no extended
Which is
extraction.
considered unrinsed?
That unrinsed is a 1 to 2 gallon.
Got
and
it.
that seems to be amongst the big distilleries, the Heaven Hills, the Buffalo Trace, the Wild Turkeys, the big guys. And then, again, hard bunged. And then onto a truck, graded out, for any major flaws, graded out, and then just out of that cooperage. Get it out of that cooperage and get it to where you're going. We're obviously a 5-hour drive from Kentucky, so we're close. Back to what you were saying about, if you can get the barrels quick, you can still see that glistening. But we used to get barrels from Tom Griffin.
Right.
I don't know if that's who you're using.
Yeah, I know Tom.
We haven't used Tom in a long time.
I think Tom's out the game.
Maybe, but there's a bunch of barrel brokers out there now that
was kind of the only
all
guy
of us
in
are
town
working with. So it behooves us right now to work with. We work direct with distilleries. We work through brokers. It's kind of I mentioned Heaven Hill going on strike. That's a huge facility, and we're not feeling it quite yet, but we might be as far as barrels in our neck of the woods. Again, Scotland's the big draw, so they're going to get their barrels one way or another.
Right.
But yeah, again, you don't get there's no tape over the bung that has a seal of approval from the distillery.
Right.
These are all kind of loosey-goosey arrangements, and you need to do the work. You don't get a COA, right?
Right.
Like you do with malt deliveries or whatnot. So obviously, as important as bourbon barrels are to us, we need to look into all those things. And again, all the bad shit that happened out of 2015, I think the positives were to go upstream and try to make sure all those little avenues were looked into that we maybe took a little bit for granted, and then downstream flash pasteurization.
And the way you were talking about it earlier with me is that to you, bourbon barrels are a raw ingredient. I mean, it's one of your ingredients, and I think you made a very good point. And I think it was kind of what you've been saying, what you've said in the past to other people who work in the industry and work with barrels is, the hops you use, you take a lot of care in picking those, and you wouldn't just pick any hops. You wouldn't do that for malt. You wouldn't do that for yeast. Why would you do it with that for barrels as well? And it hadn't occurred to me, but it makes complete sense that something that's lending that much character to your beer.
And it might even be more important because all that stuff, you know how to manipulate, the contact time is minimal, whereas you're going to rest this beer that you spent time and a lot of resources in producing in there for a year, 2 years long. It's like, it's a lot more that can go wrong with the barrels wrong than if like your hops are a little oxidized. So.
Right.
Yeah. And you want to make sure, obviously, once you receive the barrel, your practices are your practices. You want to make sure you're clean throughout, but you got to go upstream. And so we go to Kentucky, try to get down there once or twice a year at the very least to talk to distilleries, talk to the brokers. It's a little bit more older school down there. I'm sure you've been down to visit, and and then specialty barrels. When we do these reserve series with Bourbon County Stout, it may be. It's just that's through getting to know the people at the distilleries and getting them to trust us. They've been very, the bourbon world has been very skeptical of us, maybe of the greater beer world in general for a while. And they're like, what do you want to do with our stuff? You want to use our name and our logo and our barrels? But I think we've built up some trust at this point, with Old Forester and Elijah Craig and, a lot of the big, awesome bourbon makers down there.
And this is kind of a sidebar. We'll get back into the more nitty-gritty of the production of Bourbon County, because there's still some stuff that I think is really cool that I want to have you talk about. But I do want to say, as an aside, the direction that the BCS program has gone in the last couple of years is, I think, exactly what I know I said it to people. I might have said it on this show. It was exactly where I was hoping it would go, which is like focusing on specific barrels and barrel treatments, and kind of getting people to try the variations that come with different barrels and different aging process or length of time or whatever it is. I think that's really, really cool and really to me, so true to what Bourbon County, at least the lore of Bourbon County is. So obviously when I was saying it, you guys were already probably, 2 years ahead. But it's been really cool to see. I think it's been a very fun development to watch, and with the whatever versions are coming out this year, I know there's a Blanton's and there's a Old Forester again, and I think that's really neat, and it also gets you out of the rat race and the shark jumpiness of just trying to add more and more adjuncts every year or something like that. Not that I'm saying you were, but like there are people. I mean, it seems like there's only one way to go, and it's just keep adding.
Sure. We're not afraid
ingredient.
of add. I think the quote you were remembering is that I've probably overseen more adjuncts added to barrel aged stout than anyone in America. But
yes.
I don't know if that's true or not, but it's
sounds
quite
good.
a bit.
Sounds good.
But it's not a naughty word in my vocabulary, and I'm sure we'll get into adjuncts at some point. But yeah, so it's fun to taste different beers that the only thing different is the distillery, or a 4-year-old barrel versus a 12-year-old barrel. Like, we really enjoy the differences.
It's a little more of like a refined presentation of variation, I think. It's something where you're going to taste differences, but they're more minute. They're more things you have to focus on, and I think that's really cool that you guys did that, because I think it's a lot of noise going the other direction of bombastic, and it's definitely got this in it, it's definitely got that in it, to be like, no, it's because these whiskeys are different, the barrels are different, like the where they were aged was different, and that's what's going to make the beer different is very, very cool.
Yeah, and like I said, we dabble in both. We dabble in the bombastic and the nuanced.
It's fun to do both.
I personally like both.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I'm just
Balance.
glad to see that there is both now, because it wasn't always, nobody else was doing it. I mean, that's not true. I guess Eclipse, the Eclipse beers were doing it from 50-50.
Like the creme brulee is to pastry stout, is 50-50 Eclipse is to barrel variation.
Every type of barrel variation.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about what it takes to make BCS, because I think the number of barrels is kind of astounding, but it's also astounding how much beer needs to be made to fill all those barrels. And just in talking with you, there's some very unique issues that go along with brewing a beer like Bourbon County, and like, for example, how much of the production, if you can say, of the Fulton Brewery is geared around one way or another getting BCS made? Oh,
it's obviously we need a tremendous amount of ale yeast to make a 30 Plato beer 9 months of the year. And so much of our schedule, particularly, in the last 8+ years, since a lot of our sessionable ales have gone to AB breweries to be brewed, it's the biggest challenge at the brewery, is to be brewing enough sessionable ales that give you healthy yeast to pitch Bourbon County Stout.
So talk about that. Just, you don't have to get into like the nitty gritty, but just give us a couple sentences or a minute or two on what you mean by that, for someone who may not really understand why you need to brew an ale to make Bourbon County.
Well, it's a yeast dead end. So it's a 30 Plato original gravity that is terminal around 10.5 Plato. ABV ends up being around 11.4 to 11.7 pre-barrel. That's a yeast dead end, so meaning we can't use the yeast in that beer
because those conditions stress it out.
Correct, more specifically.
Repitch it off that.
So we can't, so it's what we call a yeast dead end. So you always need to be brewing other beers of lower gravity and lower alcohol to pitch Bourbon County Stout.
To harvest, as yeast factories.
Yeah, I think the number is somewhere around, we need to brew about 20,000 barrels of ale to make yeast for Bourbon County Stout. That could be Green Line. That could be 312. We've been doing a lot of 312 Shandy this year. That could be Sox Golden Ale. We've been experimenting with pitching from We've got this new beer called Tropical Beer Hug, which is 9.9% alcohol. We've been actually pitching from that on occasion, or at least experimenting with it for other beers, not with Bourbon County per se, but it's always like feeding yeast to other sources. And again, Bourbon County is the most demanding.
Now that's interesting. So then that is an interesting, it's like almost the reverse of what the stereotype of how sales and marketing comes to production and says, we need you to make this type of beer for the market, where it might be like, if you guys want BCS, you need to find reasons for us to brew,
Honkers.
this much of something. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we brew honkers on occasion.
And go find it, go find a reason. I'm not saying that's the truth, but it seems like it's an interesting concept of the brewers being like, the reality of brewing this much Bourbon County is we have to brew, you said 20,000 barrels?
So, roughly. But I mean, the good news is...
find a place for us to, so it doesn't go down a drain, which I doubt it does.
We're brewing Bourbon County 9 months of the year, so the 3 months that we're heavily emptying barrels, we're not really brewing. But, of course, you need your 312s, your Sox Golden ales.
Is that included in the 9 months? But are you counting that brewing as part of the 9 months, because you have to kind of intersperse BCS with Green Line to get more yeast for the next Bourbon County? Is that how it works? So it's just kind of leapfrogging one another?
We're brewing Bourbon County 9 months of the year. Was that the question?
Well,
yeah, and so I think the answer to the question I think you're asking is that you're also brewing Green Line, and
that's what I'm getting at. We have
at the same time, so you
At
can
the
pitch
same
off
time.
of them.
Yeah, I mean,
you can't store that yeast for 3 months and then just use it for
so,
Bourbon County.
but the good
You
news
have to have
is
both those going in parallel.
I mean, Bourbon County is obviously only sold for a week or two a year, or whatever it ends up being. I mean, one big day and then a couple weeks after, and so the release is a very small part of the year. So we need to be, we need to have a full portfolio. So it's not an issue per se, but it's definitely one of those things that we have to deal with as a brewery, and because Bourbon County Stout is, as I mentioned, very demanding on the brewery.
That's amazing. I'm guessing not many breweries have to brew that much just
for context, 20,000 barrels. I haven't looked at the numbers in a very long time, but that'd be like a top 10 brewery in Illinois of independent breweries, just that volume. So brewing 20,000 barrels to probably top 5 or 8.
Yeah.
But to feed the beast, feed the yeast. The yeast.
It's not
beast.
like it's
pretty impressive.
Yeah. So anyway, Bourbon County, I think you had one other question in there that I may not have answered, but Bourbon County at every level is demanding for sure.
Yeah. The need to make that much yeast just to brew Bourbon County blew my mind.
It's a fun little logistical thing that most people, even in the beer industry, probably don't think about.
Right.
They know that yeast management is a thing, but they don't have to deal with making so much of such a yeast-destroying beer.
Right. And then,
or they just don't repitch their yeast.
And then everything at that scale too. I mean, is part of going towards the, doing it both ways with the adjuncts, which you guys have been doing for quite a while with Bourbon County, and then also doing with more barrel-specific expressions, if you will, to use a Scottish term. Is some of that maybe caused by the fact that you cannot adjunct that much beer? Like, some of it has to be, can you have 9 variations at that quantity, all heavily adjuncted? I mean, is that a big labor? Is there a limit to how much labor, you guys have? And yeah.
I think but prior to that, the decision to go down this path with distillery-specific variants was what we wanted to do out of the gate. We just felt like at the time, I think we did Rare in 2010, and then we did Rare in 2015, and I think after that we started thinking more about it. And I think the first Reserve series may have been, I got so many Bourbon Counties on my brain. 2017,
yeah.
I want to say 2017, maybe 2018.
Sounds about right.
But that's when we really started focusing on it. But it took the relationship with the distilleries to get the trust, to get some of their more special or unique barrels, or at least just saying like, hey, we want to put the Elijah Craig logo on. And the reason why we wanted to do that, I mean, I guess technically any brewer could just say on their label it was made with Buffalo Trace barrels. There's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly legit. We wanted to go the extra step and say we worked with the distillery to make this kind of like it's not necessarily a collaboration, it's maybe a partnership's a better word, but we felt like as bourbon lovers, and I've become very much a bourbon lover over the years, that it was important to see the logos and the names of some of the most prestigious bourbon makers on a Bourbon County bottle, because that's where we were going in our heads, was like, okay, as a bourbon drinker, what bourbons excite you? Elijah Craig Small Batch and Knob Creek, or it's a lot of times it's some of the older aged bourbons, or the ones that have been doing it a long time. I mean, and there's some great craft bourbons as well, but at this point we're kind of focusing on the Kentucky based,
the ones from
big
Bourbon
ones.
County, yeah.
And bourbon has grown so much as a category on its own that there's so much more recognition and understanding of what those brands are and what they mean and how they could be different than there was, 8-10 years ago.
I think the drinkers are the Bourbon County faithful and beyond are. I think a good percentage of them are on the same page. Some people may be like, I don't care, just give me a big old stout. But I think for us, it's really interesting, and we'll just see where it heads the next few years. And just like anything else, whether it's adjuncts or not, we don't want to keep doing the same thing year in, year out. So one of the biggest things is challenging ourselves to keep doing new and exciting things and different things.
So when a new version, let's talk about adjuncts for a little bit. So when a new adjuncted version of BCS is decided upon internally for you guys, like what, and you can use a past example or whatever you want. I don't have any specific one in mind, but like what then has to happen from the moment it's decided on, okay, we're doing this, it's going to have X, Y, and Z in it, and this is what we're trying to achieve from it, or maybe they say this is what we're trying to achieve. You figure out how to get there. I don't know how it works.
No, that's a big part of my job, actually. So I'll try to be brief with this because it's kind of a long story, but kind of starting with the calendar year in early January, we do a bit of an internal competition, pitch your Bourbon County idea. And essentially we put Bourbon County on draft in the brewery, give brewers and lab analysts and really anyone who's interested at the brewery a Nalgene or two, take home a couple liters of Bourbon County, go expense some ingredients, make some concoctions at home, bring it in at some predetermined dates, and we'll usually do 3 dates in January and February, separated by about 3 weeks. So come in blind. You'll come into a room and everybody brings theirs in, and it's just a Nalgene with a Post-it that has the ingredients on it. I don't want to know who made it. I don't want to know the story that it was your grandma's recipe or anything. I just want to know what's in it, what ingredients are in it, and then we're going to go through and taste. The whole brewing team and the lab team and everybody goes in, gives written notes, scores it. Some people get really ruthless with their scores. I
have to admit, I do want to know about some of the worst.
Yeah, and it's really really fun. And so the whole goal is to create a feedback loop. And so I get all the sheets, I scan them in, I send them out the next day to the team, and I say, use this feedback if you want. It's up to you. Submit here's the date and time. It's usually a 2 or 3 hour window on a weekday. Submit on this next date, and then same thing, feedback loop, and then the final round is like you got to submit if you want to be considered. And so at that point, people have had a couple of feedback rounds from everybody that participated. Could be 15 to 25 people, and my word counts no more than anyone else's. It's just a sheet of feedback loop, and then after the third round, then usually myself and the brewmaster will decide on the 2 or 3 that we're gonna do, and that's usually based on excitement of the ingredient, of the concept. It's still blind. I don't want to know who made it, but it's got to be it's got to sing in the glass first and foremost, right? And so creativity is a huge factor. Originality and creativity are really big, but it can't be just kind of so far off that nobody's, heard of these ingredients, or, because we also have to look like, what's it going to look like on the label when you've got a bunch of ingredients that nobody's heard of? Like, how does that, we talk about curb appeal, right? There's got to be some curb appeal to it. There's got to be some excitement for your maybe not your average person, but at least your Bourbon County faithful.
Yeah.
Like, we can't use ingredients that are so off the wall and that nobody's ever heard of them. So there's got to be some curb appeal, some excitement, but originality. This year, the one that really caught our attention was Paul Cade and Jason Krasowski created a cola-inspired variant, which when I saw it on paper... I
just heard about that today.
When I saw it on paper, I was like,
no.
And then I tasted it, and I said, wow, there's something here. And it played on some of the themes. So this is original. I won't spend too much time talking about the specific one, but their thing was original cola, like going back to the late 19th century or whatever.
Highly herbal, I think.
I think it was a way
cocaine.
It was a way to
get
off
cocaine
of,
in your system.
it was a way to wean yourself off of morphine, I
now
think.
I know why you like it so much.
It's like a Four Loko we were talking about last
drinking
week.
it.
Yeah. It's great.
I feel so good. I've got so many ideas for Bourbon counties.
You want to talk tonight? 2 a.m? So anyway, but it was and then we got into what's the inspiration? Well, the flavors of cola. So it's coriander and nutmeg and citrus and all these things. Like, okay, never. I'm thinking of Coca-Cola, but this is way more complex.
Right.
So we use like 8 or 9 different ingredients, but then the idea of whiskey and cola was an inspiration. Like, you think of bourbon and you think of cola, like, okay,
yeah.
I
hadn't occurred at all to me.
So
it's interesting.
So that's a great example of like something that sounds like, even to me, like, what? And then like
that's exactly what I
tasted
thought when I heard.
I tasted it and I really loved it. And then we hear the story. Then we hear that we love stories too, but the story's got to follow the glass. What's in the glass?
Yeah,
right? I think that hopefully
you can't tell everyone the story as effectively as 2 guys sitting down with 2 other guys. Or people.
But I come from the brewery of Greg Hall, so you got to be a storyteller as well.
Right.
You got to have great beer in the glass, but you got to be a storyteller, and so that comes after. So that's one example. So we'll pick those usually by the end of February. And your question ultimately was like, what happens from there?
Yeah, then what?
I'll work with the people that created those variants, and we work on a scale-up plan. So the fact that they were able to go to Whole Foods and buy some ingredients and make 1 liter of it is great. It's what we call a proof of concept in R&D. You created something that tastes great. How do we make X amount of barrels of it? Hundreds of barrels, let's say. That's a lot of my work, and that's where I got spreadsheets and pounds per barrel, and there's a lot of pounds per barrel talk around that.
Okay.
So we go into the archive for everything we've ever done and try to make really calculated estimates, for purchasing. And I usually order a little bit more than I need to, but it's sourcing ingredients, if we're doing vanilla bean, it's sourcing 5 different samples of vanilla bean and individually doing mock-ups and which one works the best. Or this year it was cocoa nibs from, like 4 different continents. And so it's getting into each ingredient very, very specifically and for probably a couple of months. And then by 4th of July, we're underway making a lot of it. So
and what do you like? So is the beer? When is it adjuncted? When do you adjunct the BCS?
Usually July, August, September, October.
So it sits in a barrel. So you put it into each individual barrel. You add the adjuncts to the barrel.
No, we haven't done that since. So my first year on the job was 2013. We did the original proprietors, which was just toasted coconut, and then we did a beer. One of my favorite variants was Backyard Rye. Mm-hmm. Then Brewmaster Brett Porter and I and my wife actually went to Humboldt Park and harvested mulberries. We got about 250 pounds of local mulberries, which are a pain in the ass. Beautiful fruit.
It's a lot for 3 people to pick.
Yeah, it was multiple days on the job, but then we
tree. I had one in my backyard. It was a
mulberries are usually a nuisance.
Yeah.
For most people, it's just like what's on the sidewalk, and it's just like this fucking jam all over the place. And then we sourced, so that was a fraction of what we used, but it was again, the story. It's
Yeah,
like we
yeah.
harvested local mulberries and we toasted our own coconut. That was the last time I toasted my own coconut, by the way. We did it at
Nuts.com, yeah.
Kendall College. We've done a lot of our own. So we've done a lot of that, and but our yields. So this is where I'm going to get into the less romance and more brewer technical side of things. Is we want something that tastes great, but the yields that year, and this will really hurt for probably Mike and others. I think we were like 55%. When I say that, from barrel to packaging tank, we lost 45% of the beer to
Backyard
the
rye
process.
that year.
And to proprietors. The
Okay.
coconut got jammed in all sorts of different things, and it just made a mess. So
There was coconut oil in
Yeah.
the beer. I
Yeah.
remember we had a keg of it for an event we did at the Beer Temple, and there was like an oil slick on the beer, which people, I will say, could not. They
Get enough of it.
loved
Love
it.
it.
They
Yeah.
absolutely loved that there was an oil slick. By the way,
we thought we were going to get killed. I was sitting in
oh
our,
my gosh,
in our-
Well,
people were like, it was the greatest thing because no one had ever seen anything.
That
like
was a real inflection point too, right? Like specifically a coconut, like that was a real inflection point of like,
Oh, yeah.
it's got to have great head retention, and then it was all like, that doesn't really matter.
That's
for
how we
a lot,
thought
for a lot
at
of
the
these
time.
things anymore,
We
right?
poured a bottle off the line, and it was just globules. And somebody's like, "Is that coconut?" And I was like,
Just
no,
solidified
it's
fat.
coconut oil.
Yeah.
And I remember Brett and I look at each other and just like, we're fucked. We're fucked. This is 2013, right?
Right.
We're like, no, like this is awful. Like we thought it was going to be the death
Yeah.
nail for that, and it was the opposite.
It was
Like you're
right,
saying, people
yeah.
thought it was amazing, and so because we had all sorts of techniques, Brett was like, we need to bubble up CO2 from the bottom of the conical up, to
break the oil,
to move the oil to the surface. Then we'll just gently take the beer off and just leave this. We did all these things, and it just didn't end up being people
So
love
how
it.
do you
Probably for the
adjunct
better.
it then? So
So fast forward the next
Yeah.
year, I said we're never. I'm second year on the job, and innovation manager. I said we're never putting adjuncts in barrels again. That was
Okay.
The results were good from a flavor standpoint, but the yields again. When you lose
Right,
45% of your most
ridiculous.
precious beer to the process of making it, you got to use
dads
room
aren't
for
happy.
improvement. Room for improvement. So what I came up with, you remember Grundy
Yeah.
tanks, right? If you ever,
That's what
you guys
we
work,
use.
yeah.
That's what we use.
We had Grundy tanks at the time, and I had a custom false bottom made for one of them, so that we were able to load in the ingredients and draw off the bottom and recirculate through. So we would from conical, we would obviously crash the beer, dump the yeast off, like the chunky yeast, and then recirculate through this vessel. So all the ingredients were just held. And so 2014 vanilla was
Right.
made this way. All the vanilla just went in 2014 proprietors. All the ingredients just went in this Grundy with a false bottom.
Spin bots.
And it was basically V1 of what we call Dorothy, which other breweries call spin bots. And our Dorothy tanks now are much more sophisticated. Grundy tanks can hold 5 psi. Then you start getting really worried that man-way is just going to blow off in your face. So we did that for 2014 and 15, and then by 16 we'd. Have you ever seen those tanks? Those
No.
Dorothy tanks of ours?
No.
They're DCI out of Minneapolis does these nice little. It's like 6-barrel top manway, short and stout on casters tanks that 25 psi rated. They've got 2 internal tangential ports that allow you to kind of create a bit of a kind of a whirlpooling effect. And then we've got an internal. I know this is hard to visualize. I'm talking fast, but essentially it allows in an internal column with. It's a stainless steel, like a 4-foot column that's 4 inches in diameter. That's got a bunch of 3/32 of an inch holes all over it. So we can put in cocoa nibs, coffee beans, anything that isn't basically a powder, and it'll stay in that vessel, and we can recirculate beer through it. The coffee beans or cocoa nibs doesn't get stuck in butterfly valves and pumps, and the cleanup, the flavor extraction's really awesome. Our yields are like 90+%. And so everything works out. And that's just kind of the evolution of working with adjuncts at the scale that we're doing it.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of brewers, chucking it in the barrel just probably is
good enough.
Is perfectly fine. Again, it wasn't a flavor consideration.
I got a question about like the earlier steps in the process. What is, if you can tell me this, what is your favorite thing you weren't able to make because it didn't have the curb appeal, or because it was too logistically going to be too difficult? Like, is there something you had to leave on the deck just because you're like, I love the way this tastes, but I don't think that we're going to be able to get whatever number of people to jump for poppy seeds or for cashews, or I don't know whatever it would be.
Yeah. I think we've always accomplished what our first picks were, but for instance, we're always thinking about like the Bourbon County, what Bourbon County is, and what we try to be thoughtful of like what's going too far for Bourbon County. And one brewer pitched it was like a mint chocolate variant. So this is a great example. We're like, man, this tastes great, but it's just like it's really out there for Bourbon County Stout. And we said, well,
especially because it was green, I assume, right? Black speckles.
We got a history of that here in Chicago. So we said, well, let's just hold off, but let's see if there's another spot for that. And a couple months later, we're coming up on St. Patty's Day, and we start talking about Shamrock Shakes. You guys know what I'm talking about? The McDonald's Shamrock Shake. I haven't had one in a zillion years, but it's like a mint shake green or something, right? Yeah. And so we said, well, how about we do a Shamrock Stout for St. Patty's Day week, taproom only, like don't blow it up. And we've done that, and it's Bourbon County, but it's specific for that. It's just having fun. It tastes great. We found an avenue to release it. They make crowler labels. They have it on for 1 week of the year, Patty's Day, and everybody's happy. And so that was I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but it was essentially taking something that we felt like maybe wasn't quite Bourbon the right County fit, and we don't call it Bourbon County, but I think everybody knows it is. I remember one guy 2 years ago, crowlers only. He had the balls. He had a USPS box. He gets the crowler. Didn't even leave the tap room. He's packaging it in a box with bubble wrap, tapes it like he's getting ready to mail it off to his buddy.
You guys have a USPS
Yeah, can I drop it off here? You just leave it here with you?
You guys probably have a pickup, right? I'll just drop it
I set them to come here like 3:30. I got to get out of here. It's like almost 1 o'clock. So.
Right.
So, we've had some wilder ideas. Chilies are always a tough sell. 2016, we did Chipotle and Cocoa Nibs, and I really like it, but it was, and a lot of people do, but it's one of the more polarizing ones. So we actually did that one, but it was pretty spicy.
I remember you guys
spice is up there with smoke for things that are more subjective than almost anything else you can put in the beer.
Well, and they were Chipotles, so they were both smoky and spicy.
Yeah,
so we kind of doubled down on that.
Yeah.
At Fobab one year, you guys had a dual Randall setup going, and you had two like all-time interesting beers there. I think you kind of stole the show that year at Fobab. This was way back when it was down in Bridgeport, and one of them was Poblano infused BCS on the spot. And I remember there was, if you were there when there was a line, it was like nice and subtle. I then got a glass in between sessions because I was there for both sessions, and it had been sitting there for like 20 minutes, and it was like, it was hot. And then the other one, still one of my favorite Goose Island beer memories, was the coffee barley wine, which was a mistake. I heard it was supposed to be the stout, but they put the wrong keg on.
Remember Ryan Tucker? He used to work with us, big guy.
Huge guy.
So I was helping him set up for Fobab that year, and the Randall was all the rage for the activation team for like a year or two, and as brewers were like, isn't the beer fucking good enough?
Right.
Do we really need to get this thing going? And
now but we put the Randall stuff in a different batch.
We played along, and I think it was Serrano's on the one.
Serrano's,
how I remember it. But the coffee barley one was intended to be coffee BCS, but live. Like we're making coffee BCS, and so of course we had the first year. I think it must have been 2013. It was the first year of BCS barley wine, and he tapped it, and we weren't quite pouring yet, and he's like, Siegel, dude, I tapped the wrong. With the Randall, so you commit to a decent amount of beer because you're filling up the thing. And I tasted it. It tastes great, buddy. We're rolling. We're
go.
rolling. Let's just go with it. And then,
we'll do it live.
but that was the
I'll do it
inspiration
live.
for doing it.
Yeah.
All those years
And
later.
it was great. It was
We
awesome.
did the bottled
O'Reilly
version of it
version.
did the bottled version of it in 2018, I guess.
Okay,
The year when we
right,
did coffee
yeah.
barley wine.
So how much of your R&D do you do at beer festivals like that by accident?
By mistake. Yeah.
We budget for a lot of happy accidents at Goose Island, and but thankfully I haven't seen a Randall in years.
So
Yeah.
you're brewing 9 months out of the year. You're brewing BCS, which means you're filling 9 months out of the year. You're filling barrels, and then I think if I'm recalling, 4 months out of the year you're adjuncting things.
Between 3 and 4.
3 and 4.
It depends on
And
the
so-
year. Some years are more labor intensive than others.
Does that also mean 3 or 4 months a year you're just emptying barrels?
Correct.
And so how much of that overlaps? Is it
If we're not
you-
the months that we're emptying, we're generally not filling.
so the 3
Because it's
months
the
you're
same
not
crew.
you're not filling.
It's the same crew that's doing the emptying and the filling. So we take 3 months off to empty, and these are rough numbers, but
Yeah.
I think more or less the case. 9 months filling, 3 months empty.
And in an emptying season, you'll empty how many barrels?
A lot. I'm not at liberty to.
Got it,
I told
got
you
it.
the number of the whole
Like
warehouse.
10 or 15. It's a pretty rare beer, right?
Yeah. So it's thousands of barrels,
Yeah.
and it's a 5-6 person crew working 3 months to empty barrels.
And for those who don't know, you're emptying that into a sanitized tanker truck, and then it's getting driven back to the brewery. So
Correct.
which is just a mind-boggling feat.
Yep.
Our brewery brews out of Beguile, but our space is across the alley. So we fill a 7-barrel tank and we forklift it over. You guys are doing that, but like what, 200 or 300 barrels at a time?
We're restricted by weight more than anything on the city streets, so we're allowed, I think, somewhere around 175,
Whoa.
180 barrels in a tanker.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's the limiting factor.
right.
Yeah,
Crazy.
We also
Very cool.
One just on the topic of adjuncts. So we've got for a couple of years we had 400 barrel horizontal bright tanks, and we decommissioned them at the brewery, and now one of them is over at Sacramento. We don't have glycol over there, so it's just a holding tank.
Yeah. I was actually over there a couple weeks ago.
And so you saw that horizontal tank.
yeah.
That year we made a beer called Mon Cherie in 2019, and the concept was kind of like cherry cobbler or cherry crisp. So it had a big cherry presence and then kind of a crusty.
Yeah.
So we used a lot of cherries, a lot of cherry puree. We probably used 20,000 pounds of fruit. And so we added 20,000 pounds of fruit to about 300 barrels of beer and just kind of did a gentle recirculation in that horizontal tank for like about a month.
You recirculate it for a month?
Very gently on the fruit.
Whoa.
Recirculated 20,000 pounds of
Never heard.
fruit. And it's always very nerve-wracking where it's like, this beer's already a year old.
Right.
And all of a sudden we're introducing adjuncts to it. It's very nerve-wracking. You're like,
Do you see fermentation at that point, or
no.
no? Because of the
dead.
ABV, or because the yeast has offed itself,
I mean,
or because you transferred
it
off
should
so
be
cleanly?
clean. We've done enough checks at that point. Part of the post 2015, there's the fallout, of course, but the what I consider to be a great positive response on our end was kind of introducing all these checks and balances that previously didn't exist. And I mentioned the barrel specifics earlier. A lot of that work came down to the lab facility, our quality team, who are tremendous people. And so we're doing pH checks on barrels throughout the year. We're doing plating. The issue with 2015 was that our plating media didn't detect lactobacillus acetotolerance.
Been there.
And it was, of all places, Anheuser-Busch
Done
was
it.
the one that found the media, I believe MBBA. I'm not a scientist, but I'm in tune with these things. I believe the media was MBBA that was able to detect acetotolerance, and it was AB who was able to get us that media. So all of 2015 was plated and checked. It came back negative. It was
Right.
like being blind to a lactobacillus
An
strain.
unknown. Yeah.
That's also an entirely anaerobic strain of lactobacillus. So like you can't taste it. It's not like you guys tasted those things and were like, oh, it tastes kind of fucked up. Let's package it. It was like it only
beer
shows
tasted
up.
great.
It only shows up in the complete absence of oxygen, and it's one of the only strains of lactobacillus that can survive high ABV, high hopping rates, like all the stuff that you're like 15.5% alcohol. What the hell's going on?
My brewing books are like lactobacillus, and it doesn't even give it a strain. It just says lactobacillus, 8% alcohol tolerance.
Right.
12 BU
and then,
or something.
And then when you have a problem, you start Googling what the fuck is going on.
So that one,
And
that was the
Weinstefan found
super.
that
It was the
originally,
super
right?
strain, and Japanese vinegar production or something was one of the.
It's also really salt tolerant, which like is a very strange thing for it to have.
So
it's using koji or
crazy
koji's,
shit.
Soju. No, not soju either.
Something.
Naturally fermented
Something.
soy sauces typically have this thing as well.
Any other Bourbon County talk, or should we take a little bit of a break and come back and talk about some of these? I mean, I want to talk about some of these beers that we've been drinking because this whole time there's been a bunch that I've really liked and I've had questions about, but I was like, well,
I have two questions.
Yeah, by all means. Ask
So you guys are using like Blanton's barrels. Blanton's is a single barrel picked from Blanton's favorite spot of his favorite warehouse, right? Elmer T. Lee, similar vibe for Elmer T. Lee. What's the Mike Siegel age barrel combo for Bourbon County Stout? Do you have one?
For the bourbon barrel or for the time Bourbon County Stouts in the barrel?
For you, like if when you taste a singular thing, it's like, oh, I really like it out of like older Heaven Hill barrels when it's like 2 years old.
I
or
see.
Something
Right.
It might be
Siegel.
impossible. Yeah, exactly. Because I never had one either, but
So
it's
the age of the whiskey.
what
you're asking.
whatever parameters where you're like, if I could drink only this, I would drink.
Or the barrel that
12-year-old
sits in
Heaven
that
Hill
corner
barrels.
is always the best. But
There might not be an answer, and that's a
Sorry,
fine
just to be
answer,
clear,
too,
you're
but
talking about for BCS barrels or for bourbon barrels?
BCS.
let's do both.
Okay.
Oh, all right.
Because again, going back to like what's a bourbon barrel as far as flavor contribution. So a lot gets made of age statements. Well, of course, a lot of age statements have gone away, but some are starting to come back. And if you go to a place like Heaven Hill, all of it comes down to the rick houses first and foremost. Heaven Hill is just not natural airflow. They don't do any type of, these things are just kind of tin sides and wooden structures, and there's a lot of all the natural humidity and temperature change. There's no, as far as I know, there's no heating or cooling in those rick houses. It's just with the Kentucky air. Brown Foreman, which is Old Forester and Jack Daniels and Woodford, they do thermocycling. So they're actually heating, at least heating. I'm not sure if they're cooling as well, but they're kind of artificially creating. And again, this is not a bad thing. This is just their way of doing it. They're kind of speeding up the process a little bit, is my interpretation, by altering the temperature of the warehouse. Kind of thermocycling is the term. Again, they make excellent whiskey. It's not. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a different way of doing it. So certain distilleries will only do a single floor. It's not six floors high.
Like
so
the Scottish way too, the dunnage warehouses, what they would call it, because they did have some that were huge and went really high. Then there was the classic one where it could only be 3 barrels high, and you would just have these low, like really low warehouses. But it was just interesting when they were talking about some barrels they would put in dunnage, the same distillery, and some they would put into a warehouse. And then some would only do warehouses, and some would only do dunnage. And me be like, I don't know what the difference is, but anyway, that.
But the greater thing being, I think it's easy to get caught up in age statements. A 12-year. I think the real education for me was one of the more incredible days I've ever had. Was at Heaven Hill. They rolled out 10 barrels, and we were doing a barrel pick. We were actually doing a 5 barrel pick out of 10, and they're like, we don't ever do 5 barrels. We always just bring out 3. For some reason, they brought out 10 that day. And so me and Denny Potter, who was the master distiller at the time, 10:30 in the morning on like a Wednesday, roll up, and we're sampling 10 barrels of Elijah Craig. And Elijah Craig, I believe now, is between 7 and 12-year-old barrels. It used to be all 12, but they took the age statement off. And they're coming from all different heights and different warehouses. And the real education there was tasting an 8-year-old that to me tasted more complex than a 10-year-old or even a 12-year-old. And
Yes.
a lot of it has to do with, the thermodynamics, the honey spots next to the window in a rick house that's otherwise kind of blacked out by tin sides, and there's a lot at play that I certainly don't know, but it was an education for me as far as whiskey goes, that just a year of the whiskey doesn't tell you the whole story. Some distilleries, maybe more than others, they're a single floor, but in a place like Heaven Hill, there's a lot more going on.
Sure.
They've got their honey warehouses that they do Parker's Heritage out of and this and that. But bottom line is, I didn't drink whiskey before I worked at Goose Island, but Goose Island forced me to start drinking. I'm saying this, jokingly.
Interpret it however
I
you
had to
want.
learn how to, like, what bourbon was. I had to start tasting it because it was literally like part of my job was like just going back to the hops and malt talk is like, I'm filling bourbon barrels every single day.
Right.
I need to know what the difference between all these bourbons, what it really is.
Totally.
And that,
So what about-
it was an education.
What about now for BCS? Is there like a certain treatment that you like best, or after a certain amount of
type
time,
of barrel that you personally really like.
or even if you brew at certain gravities, do you like the leaner stuff that goes in for this long, or what's your?
We know,
Gravities
you, we
are
know you
pretty-
like it all. They're like your kids, but what's your
Yeah.
favorite kid?
Yeah, which
I'd
kid do you
say-
like the most?
I like Kyle the best. I don't have
I
kids.
think these days I think Bourbon County just isn't Bourbon County until about 8 months. And I think a lot of that has to do with, we don't temperature control the bourbon side. Now we did, but we've got a little bit of the wine side. We kept that 65, 70 degrees year round for obvious reasons. But on the bourbon side, we wanted to get cool in there and we wanted to get warm in there. And we wanted to, not artificially, but just through the changing of the seasons. When we were across the street at Fulton, we used to have a little bit more of a swing, but I'd say these days we're probably 40 to 45 maybe degrees on the coldest months and maybe 75, 80 on the warmest months. So because we're buffered by
That's a
that
swing.
by that brick building creates some buffering, but there's expansion and contraction of the wood and the whiskey within. And so for me, and I think for most people, 8 months is kind of like, and that's our standard, is like minimum 8 months, right? We want it to be in the barrel to have some of that period where the wood gets to, it's just the to use a bourbon industry term, the commingling of the whiskey, the barrel, the beer. At about 12 months, I think it's starting to take on the spot where we all feel like, okay, this is becoming really good now. And then beyond that, I'd say we just did a couple of single barrels that one of my projects I just kind of forgot about was Bourbon County double. It was a double barrel finished in Eagle Rare, a couple of Eagle Rare and a couple of Blanton's barrels. It was 4 years in wood between two barrels.
When I get a keg of that?
4 years.
Yeah, man,
It's a long time.
That's
It was-
awesome. When's this coming out?
So you guys-
18.8 and 18.9% alcohol.
Whoa.
So you guys rebought that barrel because it's 4 years old again now, so you guys can age your more bourbon guys down.
So what?
But
what is this time? I'm very interested in that.
It was
beer.
tap room. It was tap room only.
Where was my text?
Yeah.
Come on.
We gotta keep things. We gotta
That's
keep
awesome.
things at the tap room.
Was it good? Was it good?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was getting a bit. I get nervous. 2 years, past 2 years, even with Bourbon County, I start to get nervous for. I think the main off flavor, as I perceive it, is that soy sauce
The
Yeah.
umami.
with dark beers, and it goes from that almond, nutty, pleasant oxidative character to that soy.
And that's just a function more of time. It's not the temperature fluctuation, right? Because when I was at Pipeworks originally at our original facility, we had all of our barrels in the basement next to the glycol chillers, so they would get real hot and stayed pretty hot most of the time. And things would take about 9 months to 11 months to be like, this is pretty great. We moved into this,
so you were thermocycling.
yeah, we were thermocycling with our glycol chillers, and then we moved into a facility for adults and added a bunch of barrels to the program, and just the being above ground and having a mass of barrels together rather than individual barrels throughout a basement, things weren't tasting the same at 9 months or 11 months. It was like 16 months, maybe 18 months for it to get the same kind of wood character. But then you had to start balancing the oxidative characters. And when do you start turning from like positive oxidation to something, I would say, which was not really not normally a thing that people think about, but there are definitely positive oxidative characteristics to being like, okay, now we're starting to get like soy sauce or cardboardy or and it's a very tough. I don't know if I ever really solved it, but
the soy sauce is the big one to look out for. Yeah. Other than potential, microbial contaminations, but that's as far as just off flavors and aromas coming from oxidation. That's the one is the soy, and I think that's one I always get worried about. Certainly past 2 years, it's not something that we encounter at 12 or even 18 months.
Very interesting. I know you still have one more.
I got one more adjunct question.
I have one. So let me interject with this, and we might have to have a shortened discussion of historic beers, but we'll see.
Maybe 2 episodes.
Right.
How much time you got, Mike? You're back at it, baby. You're out and about.
But yeah, it is interesting. A lot of what you're saying, Mike, about curb appeal versus and also unrelated to what you're saying with curb appeal, but like age statement not necessarily being the entire story. This is, I think, breaking a little bit of news because we haven't mentioned it yet, but we did a single barrel with Rev, which I told
on Instagram.
Yeah. Well, just well, not really, but
okay. I saw it,
but yeah. So we did a single barrel pick, and it was amazing. They didn't roll out the barrels, but they went in and got them, and we tasted 20 barrels. Yeah, 16, 18. So 16, 17, 18. Yeah, 18 to 20 barrels. Yeah. It took 5 hours to do, and it was amazing because we got 2 barrels from each lot, and different ages, different gravities, different time in the barrel, all that.
They've got their whole like spreadsheet-o-matic.
Oh my gosh, it was amazing. But to what you were saying, Mike, before, the one that we almost picked was down to a Weller barrel that had been in the barrel for 2 years, and a Wild Turkey barrel that had been in for 7 months, right?
So you guys went curb appeal.
I mean, we also, for like the first time we'd ever done this.
Sellouts.
Well, no. I mean, I will say my favorite from whatever. You're wrong, but we were thinking like, this is such a gross like position to be put in. But the reality is, we liked them both. We were kind of split about which way to go, and we're like, well, the tie has to go to curb appeal for several reasons. Also, because we didn't want it to look like Rev was giving us an inferior barrel. Nothing against Wild Turkey or something like that. We didn't think it was, in a way, true to what we had just gone through and picking all this stuff. And Marty at Rev was like, yeah, this Wild Turkey barrel is great. If you guys don't pick this one, I'm making a note of this barrel because it's really good. And it was eye-opening that each one takes on its own life, and that one at that point in time was it was awesome. It was great. And I don't know, a lot of those things kind of hit with me, how you were saying, like, it's not just about the make and the barrel once you put something else into it, and then also having curb appeal, because at the end of the day, you're trying to get people excited about this.
And all of that ties into how it tastes to the people that are drinking it, right? If they're more excited about it, it tastes better because your taste is subjective and it's part of the overall experience you're having. So it's not flavor, it's not gas chromatograph, it's your tast for those things.
Yeah,
so
I know you guys, and of course we at the brewery, we love blind tastings, right? There's no better way to inform. When you're tasting across a range of familiar styles or whatever your reason is, it's like blind tasting's great. You take all the other elements out of it. But That's not how we taste. That's not how we taste in the real world.
It's not how we consume.
And so blind tastings are incredibly informative, and I swear by them. And I know you guys do for a number of different reasons and outputs. But the real world is curb appeal does play in.
Absolutely. For everyone, for you and for me, it's not just,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean how much experience you have in tasting does not mean that you're not susceptible to, or not even susceptible. It's just like, it's a fact.
Right. And it's
not a bad fact
no,
either.
It's not a flaw. It's
it's
part
not a
of the
flaw.
It's part of the fun.
Yeah, it is kind of fun.
I had to break it to Brophy recently that Hams and Paps are the exact same beer.
Oh, no.
Nice.
You broke his heart.
He's a loyal Hams man.
Wow.
I mean, I always it's funny. I always said those were my two favorites. I didn't know they were exactly the same, but I was like,
I'd never worked there, but I've got it multiple inside sources.
being like, it's the same.
Breaking news.
Blatz
Probably the most
apparently is its own
controversial.
recipe, but Hams and Paps are the same.
Got it.
Just different can.
Cool. I mean, I totally believe that. Your last question.
It doesn't matter. That's a better place to end than my
Okay.
question's going to be.
There you go. Why don't we take a little break? We'll come back and have some more talk. Some more talk. See ya.
Welcome back to the Beer Temple Podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike Siegel of Iswo's Brewing. I'm here with my other co-host, Chris Quinn of the Beer Temple. We're talking about Bourbon County Stout, and we're about to move into some of these kind of historical recreations with Mike Siegel from Goose Island. How you doing?
I'm back.
How was the break for you?
I'm back again.
Great.
Guess who's back?
I'm back.
Exactly.
We should tell our friends.
You guys are going to see me all the time now. I'm just going to show up every week.
Yeah. It would be the new Edmar.
You're going to live above Beer Temple and just kind of crash?
You'll live up here and just come on down and say, hey, guys, what's up?
You're kidding me.
Realize after you crashed it that you were scheduled to be on. Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, Chris. I was gaming.
Yeah.
I got this new skin.
So I was talking to Edmar. He's going to be coming back on the show soon.
I haven't seen him since our last
Yeah.
episode with him. I missed that guy.
So there's a whole nother area that I wanted to talk a little bit about that Mike has really, not just headed up, but I think created. And I don't even know if it's a formal project or side project within Goose, but you definitely do a bunch of historical, I'll call them historical beers. I don't know what else to call them. I don't know you would call them, Mike, but they tend to be English, but sometimes they're German. It sounds and beers that just do not exist, but probably their descendants do. So, like the beginnings of beers that we drink all the time, like where did these things start, or what? The beer that we drink now was based on this beer, and what's this beer taste like? Like stuff like that. And that is, to me, always been fascinating.
Yeah.
Mike, you and I have talked about it before, how like I'm just more into that side of things than you are.
I love it too. I call them alternate history beers, where they're like, what if we didn't clean up British brewing and it all still had this funked up weird thing?
And that's obviously a passion of yours, Mike, and a credit to you. None of these beers would be made if it weren't, I guess explicitly because you want to make them. Can you talk a little bit, just set us up for some of these beers that you've made in the past? We've been drinking them this whole time, and they've all been great.
Brewery Yard.
Oh my
Is
gosh.
the first one. So Ron Pattinson, you're aware of Ron.
Aware.
You've met him. You hosted our event a couple years ago. Ron is, without a doubt, one of my favorite people on the planet, and you can confidently say there is no one else like Ron Pattinson in the world.
No.
He is. We always joke. Ron and I have probably had beers in different countries with Ron, more beers in different countries with Ron than any other person that, like, even more than my wife. Ron and I have had beers in like 6 different countries.
And he's a beer historian / beer writer, right?
Yeah, shut up
beer
about
blogger.
100% amateur. Other than the proceeds from his own self-published books and whatnot. He is posted daily on his site, Shut Up About Barclay Perkins, daily, including the weekends for the last, I think, 12 years or something.
It's amazing. And just to give you an idea about this guy, we have several books behind the bar about beer or various alcoholic beverages. And, man, the thickest or second thickest, maybe the Oxford Companion to Beer might be the biggest. Maybe. But after that, it's Ron Pattinson's book on bitter. It's that one. And it's incredibly dense. But then even, like, we were joking about it the other day, and I just cracked it open, and just gems. He says there's five styles of English beer. That's it. All English beer can be broken down into 5 styles, and he listed them out. Mike got them all. Amazing. Only person who got all 5. And just like so,
not me, Mike.
Not
Guess
you, Mike Siegel.
Yeah,
no, not you. But just an interesting guy. And like if he wasn't doing it, him or like Martin Cornell, like nobody would be.
Martin's the other one for sure.
It's also something that, like, I run a Saison brewery, but I reference or I find it when I'm looking up weird Brettanomyces things all the time. It's something that, like,
shut up about Barclay Perkins.
It's not about how to use Brettanomyces or anything like zymergically about, if that's a word, about Brettanomyces, but like how is this affecting the way the beer's tasted? I probably find that website as much as I.
So you read his blog, and then did you reach out to him and be like, let's make a beer?
I remember I was heading to the Real Ale Fest when it used to be at Wrigleyville Goose, and was riding around, I think.
No. You're thinking of, that's the British one, right? You're thinking of the Day of the Living Ales, right?
Day of the Living Ales. What did I say?
The Real Ale Fest. Isn't that the British one?
Yeah, you might have just been describing the festival.
I'm sorry. Never mind. All right,
Day of Living Ales.
Same thing. Okay.
The March one.
Yes.
The
one that
years
does not
ago when it was
exist
back
anymore.
at Wrigleyville. Anyway, it was probably 2014, and that's when I proposed doing a beer. I asked Ron if he'd be interested in doing a beer because I didn't really realize that I was fascinated by brewing history until I started getting into that blog. And so this first beer, to describe it, because it was a taproom only release over 5 years ago, so I don't expect hardly anyone other than us Uber geeks to know what I'm talking about. But I'm holding a bottle of Brewery Yard.
I bought a case of it.
It's a stock pale ale, and stock meaning aged in what Ron would call trade casks. So effectively the size of a modern day bourbon barrel, maybe a slightly larger. So it's how Ron's description of it is like how Bass Pale Ale, which he says is really an IPA, how it was made in the 1870s. I think it's an 1877 Truman recipe. So what did IPA taste like in England in 1877? Well, this is what we were trying to I hope, faithfully recreate. And it's mostly floor malted, pale malt, a little bit of sugar because, according to Ron, sugar wasn't like this cheap adjunct at the time. It was actually a way to lighten the body and the color of these pale ales. And I can't remember what it was. Maybe it was 13, 14%. But lighten the body, increase the
13
alcohol.
or 14% sugar,
of
alcohol.
the fermentables.
Sugar. Sorry,
yes.
of the weight of the fermentables. And but the real key to these beers, I was telling Mike earlier, is they were hopped, ridiculously hopped. And I'm talking about kettle hops, or as the British would call coppers.
Hops,
bitter. I think this was somewhere around 4 pounds per barrel in the kettle.
All bittering too, right?
Yeah.
Not Whirlpool. Like
No, well, that's the one thing Ron will concede is like he's got a pounds per barrel number, but they didn't have hop schedules like we do now. So he kind of has to interpolate some data. That's just part of what he has to do. So we're doing the best we can with the information we have. So I think we went 50% at boil start, 25%, 30 minutes in, and 25% the last 10 minutes, something like that. So you get some flavor and aroma contribution, at least in the fresh beer, but it was somewhere around 95 BU after fermentation. Went into oak
it's like
casks.
the West Coast. This is a West Coast IPA.
Yeah,
it's 10% sugar. It's 95 IBUs. It's got some color to it. Like,
True.
and then Brettanomyces, and then aged for 11 months in Brett in barrels. So that's obviously where it veers
Diverging
off.
from the
And
West
there's
Coast.
some oak character as well, but
I was saying in the break, this is like I've had it a couple times, only through you, Chris, because you have a case.
I'm
of
the only
it.
one that I know who has this beer.
His is one
except
of my-
for Mike.
except for in my basement. Yeah.
One of my favorite beers of all time. It's
Yeah.
it's strange but delicious. The
Yeah.
Brettanomyces character is
I mean, I gambled and bought a case
Perfect.
at the
It's
time.
amazing.
And I think we're getting down there. We don't have that much left. But what? Of this beer, of the brew yard in the back. Oh, no,
Bottles,
we
not
have
cases.
less. We have less. We have less than that. I think we maybe have 4.
This inspired something that we have going at Iswas, the brewery I work at now, which is that we made. So we basically only make saison, except this one time we made a barley wine that was all Maris Otter from Sugar Creek, and then fermented with the English ale yeast and primary. Went into bourbon barrels, and then had Brettanomyces class, and I added in those barrels. The idea being like, what would have happened if we didn't get the Brettanomyces, or the Brettanomyces didn't come out of English ale yeast, and it was always this kind of like mixed culture of stuff going on. But we still started bourbon barrel aging things in America, and like those two things met. I don't know when this thing's going to come out. It's about a 9.
This is in the barrel right now.
It's 9 months
I'd love
in
to
barrels.
taste that. Yeah.
It's cool. It's way different than any barley wine anyone's drinking right now.
I mean, maybe think of
it went
coming
in
up with a
there
different
like
name for it or something, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Stock ale.
It's tasting really cool, but I think it's got maybe another.
I mean, how old is this beer that we have in the glass?
It's over 5 years
Right.
in the bottle. It was bottled in June of
And this
2016.
is a low fill that we're drinking now, and it still tastes
How does this
amazing.
one taste? This was
That's what this is.
That's a
what- that's what I
desk-aged
just
low
poured
fill.
you.
Yeah. So, but that's
Pretty good.
Brett.
It's great, and this is
It's a great beer.
yeah. So
And it's
I remember drinking this.
alive and well. I mean, it's got another. If this is after 5 years, it has at least another
got a
couple
while,
years.
ways to go.
I mean,
I remember this is a beer that created like a
It's bitter.
specific
Jesus.
memory, which not all beers do. You hope they do, but I remember drinking this for the first time with you in your backyard around
Yeah.
a fire pit when it was cold out, and it was perfect, and it blew my mind. And
right. And we had like
thanks
a
for making
That's
this, man.
great
It's
to hear. I really.
fun.
we had like a yeah. Go on.
No, it's Ron's hypothesis on this is that it was in this kind of this strain of IPA, if I can use that term, was the influence for what is now or what became Orval, the first beer from Orval.
I can totally see that.
So Orval as a monastery has existed for a long time, but the brewery, I want to say late 1920s. I don't know if you guys know, but I think it's 1920s or so, max. I
Not
don't
as
know,
old
but,
as people think it is.
Yeah, it's not even 100 years old. So, and the first brewmaster there, or head brewer, whatever the title was a British guy. And Bass Ale, again, which this is very much a close approximation, or we think of what Bass Ale was in the late 19th century, was the most popular beer in the world at the time. So the hypothesis that Ron has put together is that Orval was really just trying to be the hazy IPA of the day, like the beer that everybody was making, or beer that everybody loved. Like obviously Orval is one of the most magical beers in the world, and it also stands alone even amongst Trappist beers. But at the time, it doesn't seem to be a stretch to think that maybe they used English pale malt and highly hopped it, and then this Brettanomyces thing came into play at some point, which means I always remind everybody, or at least try to let them know that Brettanomyces means British fungus.
Right.
And some people, I always get a couple people that go, "Oh, really? Why is it British fungus?" Well, these beers were so Brettanomyces was first isolated or first published by Carlsberg, the lager brewery in Denmark, and Clausen was the one. So Clausenii, he named after himself. And they were the first to publish. I believe Guinness may have been the first to discover it. That's what Ron thinks, but they didn't publish. So what they found Brettanomyces in English stock ales, and they would inoculate pasteurized Danish stout with Brettanomyces strain once they were able to isolate it, and then after time they would get the prized English flavor. So Brettanomyces, with that aged character that we attribute to Brettanomyces, that fruitiness, that funkiness, the leathery, all that was a prized character at the late 19th century, early 20th century. And then it fell out of favor. And then pale ales became, running beers, and instead of keeping beers or stock beers, meaning that they weren't aged anymore. Basically, the modern process of making a hoppy beer, like it was made fresh, it went out to market. We have to remember that most of these English beers in the 19th century had a lot of time in wood, whether it was a big, large vat or a smaller trade cask, like a bourbon-sized cask. They spent 6 months at least up to 12 or more in wood. The Brettanomyces had time to work. The bitterness came down. The bitterness on this beer I mentioned was about 95, very pronounced on the palate. When it went in the barrel, a year later, it was about 65, still quite stiff for that residual sugar, but like a bitterness that keeps you coming back for more. And I'd say now it's probably still, in the low 50s or whatnot. It's there.
Still bitter. Oh, yeah.
But,
5 years later.
What are your
mouth-watering.
thoughts when you're a
5 years
couple
later.
weeks in and old Ron Pattinson, who's never made a beer in his life, is like, no, it's supposed to be 95 IBUs, and you're just like, you tasted this thing? It's
You couldn't drink this beer fresh. I was there. You couldn't drink this beer fresh. It was nerve-wracking, to say the least. But
Yeah.
you just... Here's why, and different brewers have different philosophies when it comes to historical interpretation. Some like to put a modern twist on it. There's nothing wrong with that. I say, well, let's give it a go and try to be the most faithful that we can, because whether it was porter ale or pale ale at the time, these were really popular beers. Now, palates have changed, of course, and bitterness is certainly in the last 5-10 years.
People are
is
still
really,
people.
But these beers must have had something about them.
Right,
And so
exactly.
that's been my that leap of faith for me, is to say, if we try to do everything we can to make these really, really accurate, I think there's going to be something to them. If we cut some corners or make them or modernize them, they're just going to kind of taste like, this doesn't taste like any modern beer I've had, and neither does Obadiah Poundage, and that's the relief. Oh shit, like it's not for everybody. By no means is it for everybody, but neither one of these beers tastes like anything I've had.
Totally.
before.
And I want to get into Obadiah Poundage, but there's two things that I wanted to comment on. One is I've been saying the exact same thing about, for probably a couple of years, about what I think is underrepresented styles that are modern styles or semi-modern styles that have just more or less gone away. And I'm just crying out to other breweries saying these beers were popular because they tasted good and people liked them. If nobody's making them, there's a market for this. So that's the same, I think, impulse that I have is diversity is good and people will still like things that they liked before.
And that we haven't evolved that fast.
Right.
Like the fundamentals of what makes something desirable or drinkable or good are not so far removed.
The second thing I want to say.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's okay. No, this is. I'm chuckling to myself just thinking about it. Is hundreds of years from now, when a beer historian, the Ron Pattinson of 2000 and
Ponrat
2350, is going back and looking at the old, Instagram and going through this thing called the gram and trying to figure out how
Wayback
to
Machine, the
replicate,
gram.
because it must have been
Hazy
good.
IPA.
Untapped,
No, a pastry stout. There's these things called extracts. So we're trying to recreate what an extract would have been. So we've got cherry extract and maple extract, but we can't use real maple. And I just love in my mind thinking of somebody going back to make...
In your version of the future, they don't have extracts.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because don't you think a more advanced society has moved past extract? Let's be real.
Of course. Yeah, definitely.
And they're now trying to recreate extracts.
Yeah, they only have,
they were back
They only
then.
have real pure cherries.
And we
from
still
their
have
farmers
malt.
market.
We have malt, but we don't have malt like they
Infrastructure is
did.
broken down. The Teamsters are still on strike.
Exactly.
No one's getting anything.
Exactly. So they have to recreate.
The
artisanal
robotic
extracts.
Teamsters are striking about on Elon Musk's head in a jar, and no one can get the extracts that they need. So they have to recreate it from actual cherries that are growing next to their house.
Exactly.
Sorry,
Exactly.
a little bit of a digression, but
I love it.
Yeah.
Hey, that's why people listen.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I want to. I want to imagine the Ron patents and trying to figure out how to make accurate to early 21st century extracts to put into stout, and people saying,
and that person
like,
is posting on their blogs saying called "Shut Up" about Sean Hill.
exactly. Anyway,
Sorry.
no, I'm the one who had the digression, because that's only the first of them. But you've done several others. I think you were talking about Obadiah Poundage is another one that I think you are very proud of. What's Obadiah Poundage?
Obadiah
Who
Poundage.
is Obadiah Poundage?
Oh, geez. Obadiah Poundage, the name is referenced to a pseudonym for what Ron thinks a brewery worker that wrote into a local magazine or newspaper in London, 1760s. I don't remember exact era, but somewhere around that period. And what that person wrote was had a lot of historical information on how porter was made in that period. That's kind of the nuts and bolts of it, why we named it that. Plus it's a great sounding name, Obadiah Poundage.
What did it contain? What did you guys do to this?
So why porter is called porter?
The beer is an 1840 London porter. So porter originated in London. It was the first industrial. So the Industrial Revolution, quick history lesson, started in England. Steam engine, the biggest breweries in the world were all in England, and the beer style that came out of that manifested from the Industrial Revolution was porter.
And the first global beer
sensation,
style.
yeah.
The first, the light lager,
Shipped across
the very
world.
first, yeah.
Yeah, shipped across the world, porter, pale malt, brown malt, black malt, maybe some amber, depending on the time. So you got to remember, porter had a pretty good run. It went from, let's see, 1720 to 1860 was kind of its heyday.
Right before.
So it had a
Lager
good 100,
came around.
140-year run. And then, of course, porter still exists today. You got to remember, this has some things in common with modern porter, but it's so different.
Well, let me also say one thing that fascinates me. One of the most fascinating things about learning about brewing history is this was the first global sensation beer style. Nobody knows what it tasted like. Nobody knows what it was really like. A lot of people have ideas, Ron.
Some Ron patents.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
People have ideas, but nobody's quite sure what this huge thing was like. Now, I think we have somewhat of a good idea because of these huge vats and
The
all that
vats,
stuff.
I mean, some of these vats in these London breweries in the 19th century were up to 20,000 barrels. I mean, these are
Inconceivably big.
wooden structures that they would talk about having like dinner and dance parties inside the empty
Literally.
ones.
That's how they would christen them, like a ship.
Yeah.
You'd christen them. They would christen them by having like a full dinner served inside the vat with tables and set up. They would have a little dinner party inside the vat to christen it. But what I mean by
sanitary.
nobody knows what it's going to taste like is how can we ever know what a beer? How many batches are not truly Solera
to make that again?
but how many batches, how many years worth of beer is in that? And they're constantly drawing and constantly adding to it because the idea was the more batches you have in, the more aged a beer you have a little bit of in there, the more complex your flavor. So
The mole.
right. So the bigger
Perpetual mole.
yeah, exactly. The bigger you go,
I mean, Guinness was making beer in vats until about the late 50s, the
Yeah.
late 1950s.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's why I think Guinness
when
is also an amazing brewery in its own right.
You know,
But, yeah.
so vats. I call them vats out of reference to the English term. You know, you may call it a fooder, either the Dutch or the French spelling. We often call them that as well. But we're talking about at Goose Island. We're talking about 60 and 80 hectoliter vessels. So, substantial wood vessels, but much smaller than the ones that were in porter breweries. And so, in a nutshell, This is a porter beer aged in one of these wood vats with Brettanomyces claussenii for a year. Then, as it was at the time, they would take aged beer and blend it with fresh beer. So this is about 1/3 12-month-old Brettanomyces aged porter, and then 2/3 fresh beer.
Yep.
You notice that when we first poured it, it had a lot more foam than you would normally get for like a foeder beer or whatnot, right? Like, and Derek Prentice, who we worked with on this as well, who's been brewing in London for over 50 years. You want to talk about a legend? You ever met Derek?
No.
He brewed it. He was the last head brewer at Young's before they closed down and just kind of, became a brand. He worked at Fuller's. He worked at Truman's. We actually we've got one in the barrel now, a barley wine as well, with Ron and Derek that'll come out next year. That is a nod to his first year in brewing in London, which was 1968.
Wow,
they used to
amazing.
They used to make. I'll finish up about Obadiah Poundage, but fresh beer, aged beer. The fresh beer gives a little. And for this one had to be flash pasteurized because you're bringing in a Brett beer and then a beer with fermentable sugar or something that Brettanomyces could ferment.
Right.
Porter wasn't typically bottled. It was a cask beer at the pub. So we did have to flash pasteurize this, but I think it's still holding up fairly well.
Yeah, it was delicious.
And I will also say, you're bringing up the whole, Orval was inspired by Bass or whatever. Think of Rodenbach now. That's exactly what Rodenbach is. It's aged in giant foeders, and it's a blend of new and young. And Rodenbach versus Rodenbach Grand Cru versus Rodenbach Vintage is all of them just adjusting the
Different
new and
blend
the
ratios,
old. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that until right now, but if Orval got their idea from the English, I'm guessing Rodenbach did.
Oh, they
as well.
explicitly say it. We got a tour. Yeah. I was lucky enough to get a private tour with Rudy 5-6 years ago, and I don't know if it's part of their standard.
Rudy
tour.
Rodenbach.
Yeah, Rudy Rodenbach.
Some of the G, it's not Rodenbach.
He mentioned the inspiration was Green King.
Oh, wow.
Green King, who still I don't know if you've been to Green King, but they still have a couple of vats, probably 100 hectoliters or so, that Suffolk XXXX, I don't know if you've heard about that. But Rodenbach references Green King. So this is an English brewery, for those that aren't aware, that's been around for hundreds of years.
Yeah,
but
forever.
Rodenbach references Green King. Yeah. The English breweries were king. No pun intended. It was really just they were the stars of the show.
Even the Germans were stealing their tech back in the day with the
they were doing
kale
cane
malt
story.
They were doing
and
500,000 plus barrels at breweries in London when Germany was still like brew pubs basically.
Yeah.
It was like that order of magnitude difference. Like they had such a head start in England.
This is still something that's like happening now where Belgian breweries are stealing British pale ideas. Like Terrace Boba, the beer that I love so dear, is openly a ripoff of
a pale ale
of Harvey's Best Bitter, but done with like a slightly phenolic yeast that has some ester pro. That's the inspiration for that thing. So this is goes on.
The tradition goes on.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
Yeah, it's awesome.
That to me is how it didn't stop. It's still happening, and it's really cool.
It's still going to happen, but just not just those two countries or those three countries. That's
inspiration goes back and forth, right?
Yeah.
For Goose Island, Honker's Ale was basically John Hall wanting to recreate London Pride.
Yeah.
In the late '80s, but for Chicago that had no beer anything like it.
Kind of like now, where it's also can't get London Pride again anymore. We're in the dead zone for that style. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
And so, we've got one more. So Obadiah Poundage, 1840 Porter, really happy with how that turned out. And our third one with Ron is in the barrel now. Cool. It's a mid 20th century barley wine so Derek said at the time, so Truman's was a brewery in London. There's a brewery in London now called Truman's. It's unrelated. It was kind of a name revival. The Truman's Brewery, which was a big brewery, one of the big, shut down I think in the 1980s in London. But when Derek started, they also had a brewery up in Burton, and they would brew a barley wine and age it in casks up there, and then they would bring the cask down after between 6 and 12 months to London, brew a fresh batch, and blend the two. Almost the same ratio, about a 1/3 aged to 2/3 fresh. There's something about that ratio. You get some acidity and obviously some character from the aged beer, and then you get some sparkle, as Derek calls it.
Sparkle,
and
I love
some
that.
and some body. You bring back a little body and something you may have lost in the process. And just the blending of fresh and aged beer is just this thing that's just really fascinating. And that's been a fun one with Obadiah Poundage, and we're going to do it again with the barley wine.
Awesome. That's great. That's
What
cool.
is that? Can you tell us more about that barley wine, or is this like
It's
secret?
No, it's not secret. I mean, these are is Chris wasn't far off. These are super passion projects. You know, it's like Bourbon County definitely keeps the lights on, and I spend most of my time on that. But they at the brewery, they know I love this stuff, and these beers have a certain audience. And I mean, we made a 20-minute video that's on YouTube that I think has got like 3,400 views.
I've watched.
I told him, I'm like, I want to make a long video, maybe like a half-hour video. And they're used to making 90-second videos
Right.
and 3-minute videos. I'm like, this isn't. You're going to have to indulge me here.
Right.
And we spent like, I don't know, many months putting that video together, and I'm super proud of that because, again, going back to storytelling, right? It's like the beer, first and foremost, has to be good, right? We're not trying to sell something that is just a bunch of historical details.
Sure.
We wouldn't put it out if the beer didn't meet our standards of quality. But beyond that, huge opportunity to tell a story, and maybe it's just the people in this room, and if it is, that's great. But I'm really behind it, and I think one of the most important aspects is giving Ron a voice. You know, we fly him over, we put him up, we pay for his time. It's important for him to be recognized for what he's doing because he's not a professional. It's like he is doing. To me, this is a service to the beer community. What he's doing.
It's like the Wikipedia of British brewing. Except
There is
one
no
guy.
one else
Yeah.
like Ron. You know, Martin's his own little
Yeah, it's a
beast
different
of
thing,
history,
yeah.
but he's got a different thing.
He's got a different angle.
Angle. But the two of them are fantastic.
Absolutely. And I will say something that I've said to you, Mike, in the past. I mean, good for you for doing it. And if it weren't for a large brewery, who else could fund a passion project where you're even sourcing heritage, malts and researching how stuff is made? So I mean, it's cool. It's cool.
Well, I don't mean to. I don't know if that was trying to wrap this up, but
No.
do any of these have diastag brown malt in them?
Oh my gosh! Yeah, now that's that couldn't have waited till the recording went off for that one, huh?
No,
Okay.
not at all. I need to know.
We had
On the air. Everyone needs to know.
I need to know.
If anybody's interested, go check out the Goose YouTube channel. The Obadiah Poundage 20-minute video gets into all of it. I'm going to give a call out to Andrea Stanley, the owner and maltster at Valley Malt in rural Massachusetts, in Hadley, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
She is a rock star of malt, and so she made brown malt. She made 19th century brown malt for us.
Which diastag brown malt is not a thing you can just get anymore. There's like 2 people, I think, that are making it.
Yeah, and I think Sugar Creek, I
Yeah.
know they've been, I haven't used any of theirs, but I know that I've talked to them about it. But so looking at the stuff, the brown malt, and I'll be brief here, but when you receive malt in, as a brewer, these days you want it to be homogeneous, right? Like you chew it, you want it to be dry and not musty and consistent in color. This brown malt from Andrea was done. There was a series of steps, but essentially it's kind of smoked and roasted over a series of different hardwood fires, and what you get is almost like 5 or 6 malts in one. You get a diastatic pale malt for the stuff that doesn't touch a lot of the heat. You get a smoke malt. You get a roast, almost like a. I'd say there were anywhere from like 10 to 500 Lovabond malts in one handful.
Wow.
You had dark malts. You had caramel malts. You had smokiness. You had
So all
pale.
this like blending is just is
so
kind of
that's one
equating,
malt.
But
just
it's
equating to what
happening
was
in the
happening.
process.
Well, that's what I'm
special.
saying.
This
but it's
is an
trying to
important
equate
point.
that.
Modern
No,
specialty
it's how they would
malts-
make malt then, right?
Yeah.
Right. What I'm saying is what brewers are doing now with the blending.
Right.
Is essentially trying to equate
I was
just
gonna be
what was done.
Not to be crass, but like the home brewer, we're going to put 1,900 different malts in this stout we're making. Well, it kind of happened because you had this diastag brown malt that had such a variety of expressions in the grains.
It was cheap malt.
grain
Talking to
grain.
Derek as well, he's like, brown malt was cheap. London porter breweries were big operations, and they worked on economies of scale and efficiencies.
Right.
And brown malt was used in porter for a long time because it was cheaper than pale malt. And the reason why, the story goes, why the number one reason why porter was aged so long is because the brown malt in the fresh beer made it more or less undrinkable.
Yeah.
It needed to take on, it needed the Brettanomyces and those other, I'll call it the alchemy of time and interaction with wood and Brett to transform it. Almost like, we talk about biotransformation today, taking sulfur compounds and making them something really pleasant. I see it as something similar to that, where it was like taking this unpleasant kind of whatever the acrid, whatever the qualities of the brown malt were, fresh, after 6-12 months, it transformed into something well beyond what that fresh beer was.
Cool. And to bring Guinness back, I think they were one of the first, you said, to maybe realize that Brett was a thing. I think we're also one of the first to realize that pale malt was also more efficient and to then switch to pale malt with a roast to add the flavor because it made more financial sense.
Right.
And it's amazing. All that stuff. We can go forever.
Yeah,
on
when you look
that,
at brewing history,
but I won't.
so much more of it is practical than romantic than you want it to be.
But there is a romance to that.
Goes around the horseshoe, makes it romantic again.
Exactly.
The creativity of running a business creates these flavors that you then adopt or adapt to, and it's kind of very fun.
Taxation and legislation has a lot to do with it.
My
Ron will tell you
gosh.
that. So the Free Mash Tun Act
almost
of
everything
1883 allowed
classic.
English and British and Irish breweries to start using roasted barley, because otherwise, before that, they just had to use malt.
Right.
So the introduction of roasted barley was because of, like I was talking today with Granahan about Reinheitsgebot and how
up,
German
Ryan?
brewers, craft brewers are like, God damn it, like Reinheitsgebot, it's so restricting, right? You can't call it beer in Germany if you use fruit or if you use these other adjuncts. And so legislations and restrictions and taxations have more to do with beer styles and how, up until the modern day, than just about anything.
Yeah.
Yep. That reminds me, we should do a show on like the politics of beer styles because
Hot take history.
we should. We'll write that down. Okay, but we should end it now. That'll be for another show. We'll have Mike back for that show then.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. This has been a lot of
very
fun for me, and thank you for bringing the beers. Just thank you. Is there anything that you would like to say in closing? Anything else that we did not hit on? You don't have to have anything to say.
I just want to say thank you to both of you for having me.
Our pleasure.
It's always, I'm back. I'm out. So
Back, baby.
I hope to be back again before too long. But always love coming here. Always love seeing you guys. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, man.
thanks for coming.
Likewise. Anything you want to say, Mike, before we head on out of here?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Check out Iswas on Instagram, I guess. I should probably start plugging my business. Yeah.
Blatant plug.
Yeah. Iswas Brewing on Instagram.
Come here every week. I think you're due a plug.
Once in a while.
Well, I
remember.
want to thank everyone, and it's been a while since we've had a
been a
peanut
while.
gallery. But Max and the peanut gallery here. We're talking about Orval. Magically,
brought
some
some
Orval just started showing up, so he made up for spooking me spaghetti
I gotta
style
say,
earlier.
I think the brewery yard beat the Orval.
Oh, I mean the brewery yard is great. I'm at this point now, I'm worried. Like, oh boy, I don't have an endless. It seemed like I had an endless supply because it was a little rough earlier. I was fine, but it wasn't something I was going to.
And then I found out you had it. I'm like, can I have one of those?
Yeah,
I have one of your bottles at my house.
Yeah,
like, I talked you into giving me one
because I let you know that I had it, and I was like, hey, I have this old ass Goose. Anyway,
and I freaked out about it.
We should get out of here, but Serge, great to have you back, and yeah, thank you guys. One thing I didn't mention, and we haven't read letters in a little bit, so we'll do a little bit more housekeeping at the end when everyone's already checked out. Perfectly fine.
Best time.
If you want to, oh man, I forgot to put our whatever. I will go back and put on our email and our address. If you want to send actual mail, we've gotten more letters now, so we're a little backed up on reading the actual physical letters.
We might have to do a mailbag.
Or maybe haven't checked the email in a couple weeks either, so apologies for the people who sent emails.
What, 2,000 or 3,000?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So if we don't read your email, don't be mad at us.
Right. I mean, most of you guys, I do understand you're also trying to sell me various porn-related things, which I appreciate. I read every one, guys. Every email we get, I read. But thank you guys so much for taking the time to do that. We will get to all those letters. I absolutely promise you.
Thank you for sending them. Keep sending them.
Yeah. Thank you. But
also send us bad reviews. We were talking earlier. We have no bad reviews.
No, don't send us bad reviews. Send us real reviews.
No, send us some. Oh, yeah. Send us real reviews. But if we're doing bad things, let us know.
I will say
we've gotten no negative feedback except for the Zombie Dust Radio Hour, which I think is just not right.
That gets mixed. That gets mixed.
Mixed at best.
I've got some negative feedback for the quality of my microphone versus the quality of your microphones.
Listen, you get the SM58. Don't worry about it.
I have a couple different times.
We sat you away
should I get another one? And
though,
people have been like, it's fine.
It's a minor gripe.
Let's get out of here, guys. Until next week, so long.
Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again. Remember, this is what we wanted. Remember, this is what we said. To never be heard or seen from again. Remember, this is what we